updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg News with this Bloomberg Business Flash ahead of tomorrow's jobs report. The major stock average is a little changed right now. S&P 500 after another record close yesterday, just dead flat, down just about 2 points. 5 of the 11 major industry groups, they are higher. Consumer discretionary, that's in the lead right now. The best performing individual stock in the S&P 500, that belongs to Brown-Forman. Those shares up just about 10%. I did get data today. It saw this morning that shows new jobless claims edging higher last week, though they do remain close to historic lows. Stephen Englander at Started Chartered Bank says the path ahead for interest rates is probably lower.
We think the market's too pessimistic on what the Fed's going to do. We think that they can cut, every meeting for the next 3 or 4 meetings if the numbers come in on the soft side.
And right now, the S&P 500, again, 2 points lower, 6,084. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 115 points. That is a decline of about 0.25% right now. The NASDAQ 100, 21 points lower, and that is down 0.1%. Just an update on this murder in Midtown yesterday. Police, the NYPD, just releasing new images of the shooting suspect in the murder of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. The suspect is unmasked. This is at a hostel in Manhattan. It looks like the Upper West Side. It's a pretty clear shot of the guy's face. One of the pictures shows him with a big smile on his face. So, Paul and Alex, I would conjecture that it is just a matter of time before the suspect is rounded up by the NYPD. Anyway, we check the markets and all the other news that's happening right here on Bloomberg Radio all the time. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
Thanks so much, John Tucker, and we will keep you updated, of course, on any headlines as they cross. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. And one of the best is Jennifer Bartashis, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Analyst for Retail Staples and Packaged Food, the perfect person to talk to when we get retail staples and packaged food companies like Kroger, for example. That company narrowing its annual outlook due to an uncertain economic environment. They adjusted their earnings guidance by about 5 cents, and the revenue for the company last quarter fell by about 1%, also trailing estimates. It did reiterate, though, confidence in its acquisition of Albertsons being approved by regulators, which was maybe one positive. That stock, though, if I believe is accurate, is actually up by 0.3. No, just kidding. No, maybe. I'm looking at TD. Anyway, we're going to talk to Jen. Hey, Jen, what did you make of Kroger?
Actually, overall, Kroger had pretty solid results. And you can look at what they're doing with the forecast, but there are a lot of moving pieces involved in that. They had the sale of a pharmacy business. They had, poor weather a year ago. There are a lot of things that kind of come into that. But I think the takeaway for me that's most important is that their core business, the grocery business, is doing well, and it's responding to the strategies that they've been investing in. And I think if you look at what we've heard from retailers in the last 2 days, that all cater to the value segment, which was Five Below, Dollar Tree, Dollar General, Kroger, there's actually some cautious optimism that the low-end consumer is not getting worse, but the middle-income consumer is feeling a little bit more confident. So that's a very interesting takeaway from all these earnings calls.
Kroger hitting a 52-week high today, up 0.7 of 1%. See, there you go.
I got there.
See, way back in my memory banks, Jen, I seem to remember Kroger announcing an acquisition of Albertsons. Where are we on that thing?
It's been years in progress now at this point, Paul. But where we are, we're still waiting for decisions from some of the court proceedings that have taken place. And until that happens, they're overdue at this point. We were expecting them in at the end of October, beginning of November. That will dictate what the next step is with regards to whether the FTC has the ability to make a ruling from its internal process or not. So we're still in a hold and see pattern. Overall, our sentiment is that it is tips unlikely that the deal will go through, and we do think that the FTC will prevail. But we'll have to wait and see once we hear what the judge's rulings are.
Is there any sense that a Republican in all three branches of the government will the legislature and the executive branch will, in fact, maybe help this deal get through, maybe?
Well, I think that it's probably something that will help other deals get through, but this one has been in progress for so long.
Right.
And the administration change doesn't happen until late January, that by the time new players are put in place, we may have already heard verdicts from the judges in the court cases that have already been heard. So I don't know that the regime change in terms of politics will have a positive influence on this particular deal.
So when you look at Kroger, and then I think we can also wrap in Dollar General and even Dollar Tree from yesterday, do we have a good takeaway from the consumer, or is this all idiosyncratic in how these guys are managing their business and pricing and inventory?
So, we hear comments from the companies about the patterns and the behaviors of the consumer. Those haven't really changed materially since first quarter, second quarter, and that's that lower income households are still buying close to the point of need. So they're waiting until they need something, then they buy it, then they use it, and then they move on. We're hearing that, expenditures at the end of the month are lower than at the beginning of the month. That reflects, not having enough money left from your paychecks. So that message hasn't changed. What we are seeing, though, is that efforts that these companies have been putting into improving kind of their basic retail operations are resonating with customers, and that they're at least appreciating the value perspective that they're offering. Whether that's sustainable or whether that's just a short-term blip because people are seeing the changes in the store operations is something that we'll be watching as we head into 2025.
So, Jen, the packaged goods companies you follow, they raised prices when their prices went up. What are they doing now that the rate of inflation has been slowing for the past 18 months or so? What have they been doing with their pricing?
So from the packaged food company perspective, obviously they're reticent to lower prices because, obviously once you have a price set at a certain level, you don't really want to go backwards. But the retailers are putting a lot of pressure on the packaged food companies to bring prices down. And that really is commensurate with what their input costs are. And so what we've seen at shelf in retailers is that prices have been slowly coming down. It's just that they still remain elevated if you compare them to where they were in 2019. So, packaged food companies are under a lot of stress and will be, especially in the first half of next year, because they still haven't been able to spur higher volumes of goods sold. And so it's, you can lower prices, but the only way to offset that to, prop up your top line growth and your profit is to sell higher volumes. And that's what's been a lot trickier to materialize. And so that's one of the things that we'll be really watching carefully as we move through fourth quarter and into next year.
What about tariffs? What's the question mark there? Brown-Forman said that they are prepping for tariffs. If they're implemented, they have some mitigation strategies and certain brands. And I'm wondering if we're hearing the same thing from like a Kroger.
Kroger actually didn't talk a lot about tariffs, but we did hear a lot about it from Dollar Tree and from a little bit from Dollar General. One of the big challenges is that currently the North America, Mexico, Canada trade agreement does not allow tariffs on produce. And if an executive order puts a tariff on a universal tariff on goods imported from Mexico, that will have a huge cost implication for retailers, especially like Kroger and grocers, because they have pivoted all of their strategy around fresh and making fresh affordable and accessible and good. And so we're watching that very carefully with the impact tariffs could have on the staples retailers. And in terms of being able to mitigate that impact, when it comes to goods that are manufactured that are non-consumable, we went through this in 2018. And so retailers do have a little bit of experience on how to mitigate that through pack size, through negotiation, through different country of origin sourcing.
Yep.
So it seems like they're really focusing on that, but we'll see how it plays out. All
right, Jen, thanks so much for joining us. Jen Bartashis, Senior Retail Staples and Packaged Food Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us via Zoom here. That's the last thing I think consumers need is another bout of price inflation, coming from whatever source, tariffs or some other, particularly in the supermarket aisle, because, boy, that's where I feel it. I think a lot of other folks feel it as well, just the price of stuff now versus pre-pandemic. Big change. I'm not sure that's coming down. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
tariff smart actors.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast. More tech earnings coming out here. We've got HP Enterprises bringing out some results here. Woo Jin Ho joins us, Senior Technology Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Wooj, what do you expect to see here, or what's HP Enterprise? What are they telling us about their business these days? Because this is the server business. It feels like it's got to be a nice place to be in this tech stack.
Yeah, hey Paul. So there are two things, right? In terms of HPE, AI, in terms of their revenue, how are their orders and bookings progressing, as well as the AI server margins. That's where they fell short last quarter. Hopefully we'll get a recovery this quarter, and we've heard it from others that they have been recovering. And also on the traditional server and storage side of the business, that should be we should start hearing a recovery story from there as well.
What does that recovery, do we think, look like?
Well, look, for HPE, the server story has been growing for the last couple of quarters, and we actually want to see accelerated server growth. One of the key theses that we have, and we published our hardware outlook, is that there is going to be this server modernization trend that's going to happen in calendar 2025, and we do see HPE as one of the beneficiaries of it.
So what is HPE's product offering, service offering, as it relates to AI? How do they fit in here, Wooj?
Yeah, so if we look at HPE, keep in mind they acquired the old Cray business several years back, and they've been able to transform that business into more of an AI type of story, pairing that with their traditional server side of the business. Now, the one thing I will say is that they haven't gotten as much momentum as someone like a Dell or a Supermicro, but that thing is going to start coming. That business is going to start coming along. The one challenge for HPE is that instead of focusing on some of the cloud players, they've been more focused on the enterprise. And the enterprises traditionally have been slower to adopt. I do think that might happen in 2025. That's why their AI server sales are smaller than someone like a Dell or a Supermicro.
Interesting. Why has the enterprise area been slower to pick up?
A couple of things. If we think about where all the spending has been, it's been more on the training side of the business. And the hyperscale cloud customers have been buying all the AI servers. The enterprise customers, they just don't have the money to spend the millions and billions of dollars to build out the AI infrastructure to train these models. What they are going to do is focus more on the output side, which we call the inference side. And now that some of these models have been built, now they can really start investing in it. But it's going to be smaller in scale and smaller investments. So many more installations, but smaller size deals. For the global computer hardware business, for the storage business, tariffs cannot be a good thing, are they? Yes and no in general, but the one thing is that from a tariff perspective, keep in mind that the business is partially software driven, and the hardware is largely built in the United States. Now, if we're talking about the hard drives itself, they're built in Thailand as well as in some of it in China. So they may be able to bypass the tariffs for the most part.
But take a look at the stock. It's had a pretty solid run, particularly from that low that we saw back in September. Is it going to be a show-me story on earnings in terms of moving the equity market?
Yeah, from a show-me story, let's look at it from a valuation perspective. It's trading at 10.4 times forward earnings. If you compare that to someone like a Dell, which is trading at around 13 times, one can say is that they're not getting fully valued for their AI story. I will tell you that if we look at this company from a 2025 perspective, if we factor in the recovery as well as the potential of the Juniper deal finally closing and the positive impact from that, there might be still some valuation expansion to be held. But from an earnings perspective, it's mainly the AI show-me story.
All right, earnings after the close today for HPE. I'm telling you right now, Wooj, I'm not going to be listening to the conference call, but I'm guessing you are. What are you going to be listening for?
Well, I will be listening to the conference call, and again, as I started off, it's going to be more on the AI margins for the first on the first place, and then following up with that, it's actually going to be on the networking side. If there is going to be a source of upside, it's going to be on the networking side in my mind.
All right, Wooj, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Thanks for doing all my homework for me because I will be on television helping to break these earnings as well. Woo Jin Ho, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Technology Analyst, joining us there. Paul, I got to say, there is like not a lot of movement in the broader equity market. We are going nowhere fast, which is funny because volume isn't terrible.
No, we'll get the jobs data tomorrow, and I think that'll be a data point that the market's going to pay close attention to. Again, the change in non-farm payroll for November, 218,000. But the 2-month payroll net revision, negative 112,000. So a couple different, kind of signposts there, and people are going to try to get a sense of where this labor market is. Fed's certainly paying attention.
Definitely paying attention, and also sort of the read-through to the consumer. Remember, American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, climbing after bullish outlooks. I mean, who would have thunk that at the end of the day? Experiences, man. You keep saying it.
Well,
I
just booked tickets to the Eagles at its Sphere in Vegas for April.
Okay. That's my birthday. Are we going to go as a show?
We could go as a show.
There you go.
Boy, they were expensive.
They were expensive. As he whispers that into the microphone. All right, that wraps it up for me and Paul. Coming up, Balance of Power with Joe Matthew is next after this a global news update. And just checking in on the markets just to get you updated here. The S&P holds firm, totally flat on the day. The NASDAQ just up by 0.1%. The Dow down by 0.2%. Happy Thursday. Happy Friday Eve.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. New information surfaces as New York City police hunt the gunman who shot and killed the United Healthcare CEO. CBS's Anna Schechter on what was found on ammunition at the scene.
There were words written seemingly with a Sharpie pen, and police are investigating whether those are related to how insurance companies, particularly United Healthcare, might have responded to claims requests for reimbursements or coverage.
The suspect was also seen on video near a Manhattan building before the shooting. Acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe tells Congress reforms are underway after the problems that were uncovered in the Trump assassination attempts. There were fireworks when Texas Republican Pat Fallon used a photo of a 9/11 remembrance event to accuse Rowe of putting agents out of their usual positions so he could be more visible.
We're auditioning for this
I was there to pay respect for a fallen member of this agency.
You endangered President
out of line, Congressman.
Vice President Harris's life. Did you have a radio with you?
Mr. Fallon,
Did you wear a vest? Did you have a weapon?
Embattled Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth back on Capitol Hill to meet with GOP senators. He says about President-elect Trump.
He's behind us all the way. Spoke to him this morning.
Did you get the votes yet confirmed?
That's why we're here to meet with the senators.
The Justice Department indicates it will sue the city of Memphis if needed as it calls for police reforms. Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark says it's the result of a long investigation.
We found that the police in Memphis use excessive force, that they stop, search, and arrest people unlawfully, that their policies have a discriminatory effect on Black people, and that they discriminate against people with behavioral health disabilities.
Deep cold from the Midwest into the east with below normal temperatures and frigid wind chills. CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore says some places are seeing snow.
Over 59 million people will be impacted by the storm, getting the snow, especially some lake effect snow, 10 to 20 inches on top of some of the snow that has already fallen.
Well, there's a new leader when it comes to auto reliability.
Subaru pushing Toyota and Lexus out of the top spot on Consumer Reports reliability rankings. The study's author, Jake Fisher, saying Subaru doesn't add new technology until it's ready for prime time.
Subaru, they incrementally make them better.
Asian brands dominated the study. Domestic brands didn't do so well. Jeff Gilbert, CBS News, Detroit.
And checking Wall Street, right now the Dow is down 114 points. The S&P and NASDAQ are higher. This is CBS News.
world of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
It's Doge Day. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy arrive in Washington to promote Donald Trump's new cost-cutting panel, the Doge. But will anyone listen? We'll get into it ahead with Bloomberg's Mike Dorning live in Washington. Pete Hegseth, meantime, also looming large again today on Capitol Hill. We'll have the latest on the Trump transition after another round of potentially damaging stories about Trump's pick for SecDef. Rebel fighters in Syria moving closer to Damascus. We'll have the latest today from our national security team, and we'll have analysis on our top stories from our political panel. Jeannie Shanzano, Democratic analyst and Bloomberg Politics contributor, joined today by Republican strategist Chapin Fay. It's all after a look at Wall Street. Glad to say we have Denise Pellegrini on the case today. How's it look, Denise?
Yeah, we check the markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. Right now, Joe, stocks are mixed. And this could be why. Ira Jersey, chief U.S. interest rate strategist with Bloomberg Intelligence, says signs are growing. The Fed is thinking about putting the brakes on the interest rate cutting as we head into the mid-December meeting.
You heard Jay Powell talk about it this week. You heard Chris Waller talk about it this week. You heard Mary Daly talk about it this week. They're all saying they want to go slow and cautious. So that means that at some point they're going to skip a meeting. The question is, will it be this month or next month?
And Jersey there on the Bloomberg Surveillance podcast, which you can download wherever you get your podcasts. Today's weekly jobless claims not giving us a lot of clues. Applications for unemployment benefits rose to the highest in a month, but continuing claims dropped. Tomorrow we get the big monthly jobs report. Right now the Dow down 113 points. S&P 500, it is up just fractionally, up 1, and the NASDAQ, it is up 23 points right now. The yield on the 10-year right now, 4.19%. NYMEX crude, it is up slightly, just about 68.55 a barrel right now. OPEC Plus delaying the revival of its oil production amid a looming surplus. COMEX gold down more than 0.5%. Bitcoin, it is up about 3% right now, sitting just over the 101,000 level, off its highs of earlier today. And shares of TD Bank down more than 5%. Reporting adjusted quarterly earnings that missed the average analyst estimate, also suspending its medium-term financial targets. And shares of United Health also lower, down about 3%. The investigation into yesterday's shooting murder of Brian Thompson, who led the company's United Healthcare Insurance Division, still underway. Authorities executing a warrant on a New York City location, according to some reports. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now whenever you get your podcasts. I'm Denise Pellegrini, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash Jump.
All right, Denise, great to see you. Thank you so much. We'll have much more on the markets from Denise as we make our way through hour one here of the fastest show in politics. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. You made it to Little Friday. You thought it was Friday 2 days ago, didn't you? If you follow political news, that's certainly been the case because we've packed a week into just about every day here. And welcome to another Doge Day. Elon Musk is in town. This is the buzz right now. Vivek Ramaswamy also getting on the jet to come in from Ohio. Capitol Hill today to promote, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. The question is, does this amount to anything? And it's happening at a very busy time for the Trump transition. Pete Hegseth is back up there again today, working the halls of the Senate after his meeting with Joni Ernst that left a lot of people wondering what was going on with the pick for defense secretary. We'll have much more on that coming up with our friend Mike Dorning here in Washington. The question about DOGE, though, is who's listening? And will this actually result in legislation? By the way, Marsha Blackburn says yes. Just kicked out a tweet on that. I'll be introducing legislation that coincides with DOGE's plan to make the federal government more austere. What did she say? More efficient? We heard from Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, on this idea of shrinking government. Here's what he said.
We do have to scale back the size and scope of government. It serves the people. It unleashes the free market again. Our policy changes will be a part of that, but I think that if we can make some dramatic changes in downsizing the scale and scope of these things, we'll go a long way.
So two specific examples, Planned Parenthood and PBS, are in congressional control. Are you planning to axe both of those?
I would like to, that's for sure.
Spending for both of those?
Yeah, we got to build consensus to have the votes to do that.
Oh, so we're back to Big Bird Is that how we save $2 trillion? That was the promise. Remember, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy cut $2 trillion without even thinking about it here. Fraud and waste are the key words of the day. The program brought to you by the letter W and the word waste. Mike Dorning, it's good to see you here at the table as always. You've lived through a couple of blue ribbon panels.
Yes.
Is this one any different?
Well, it could be. I mean, it'll be. We'll see how it goes. The problem is the Republicans want a giant tax cut.
Yep.
It's going to be very expensive, drive up deficits a lot, just as the baby boomers are going to be straining the Social Security and Medicare spending. So one way to try to address the giant deficits that are going to come out of this is to try to cut government spending. And it's much better to sort of cast it in terms of efficiency, unleashing the free market, than, hey, we want to take away your benefits, we want to cut services. And, you know, there's always room to improve the government. The problem is, if you start looking for improvements, it's often like getting rid of something that's very important to some small congressional district, and that congressman's like, wait a minute. My district, my people, they need what they need. The other districts, their people, they don't need what they need.
Mike Johnson, despite what we just heard him say, concedes that he has no idea what the process would be for Congress to follow the DOGE, hasn't thought about whether he'd try to pass a bill to give these proposals guaranteed floor consideration, for instance, and has not even had a detailed conversation with Donald Trump about the way this is supposed to work. So, you know, critics say there's a bit of a shell game going on here. To your point, Donald Trump wants tax cuts that could be inflationary, could add to the deficit. And so check out what Elon is doing over here, suggesting savings that might offset those cuts.
Yeah, so my guess is he won't be able to deliver what Elon is promising, but they'll be able to get something done. This is just a way of building support for the idea of cutting government spending, trying to reduce some of those costs. And you can think of it as like the opening part of a campaign. How they actually get it done and how far they're able to go, we'll see. But I'd be surprised if they can't make any headway at all.
Interesting. We'll, of course, keep tabs on this because it's certainly got a lot of attention. And it's unclear exactly what the budgeting process
it's going to be tough.
Going to become even for the rest of this year. We've got a funding deadline on December 20th. All the while, because we need more noise. Pete Hegseth is back up on Capitol Hill again today. Mike, we woke up to front pagers in the Washington Post and in the New York Times with stories about his alcohol use.
Yeah.
This has become the narrative. It was first sexual assault allegations. Now it's about his life and drinking. He talked to Megyn Kelly about this and said alcohol would never cross his lips if he got the job. We did hear from Pete Hegseth a little bit earlier today. Let's listen to what he said.
What did President-elect Trump tell you, Mr. Hegseth? He's behind us all the way. Spoke to him this morning.
Did you get the votes yet confirmed?
That's why we're here to meet with the senators. It's been a wonderful process.
Okay. Does this sound like someone who's going to make it to a hearing?
It does not sound to me like someone who's going to make it to a hearing. And it's not just Trump. Every president is behind their nominees all the way up to the moment that suddenly there's a discussion and the nominee decides after the discussion with the president they want to withdraw. There's no percentage in not being fully behind someone until you, like, cut them off at the neck. But we're seeing more and more allegations, more and more reports of sexual misconduct, mismanagement, alcohol abuse, and it just keeps coming out. And then there was an interview today with someone who's very influential among Senate Republicans, Joni Ernst.
Yes, right.
Combat veteran, member of the Armed Services Committee, rape survivor. She very pointedly in the interview did not support Hegseth. She didn't come out against him, but she didn't support him.
A frank and thorough conversation.
She had a frank and thorough conversation with him yesterday. In diplomatic speak, that's usually like a very pointed conversation. Yes. And, you know, she also said, hey, we need to thoroughly examine all this, which means this stuff just keeps coming out for months because they're not going to have the confirmation hearings until January, and they won't have a vote until after January 20th. President Trump's already been looking at alternatives, including Governor DeSantis, his rival in the Republican primary, Joni Ernst, in fact, probably others. So if you're on Pete Hegseth's team, this is a day where you're not making headway and things are closing in around you. So it's very problematic for him.
All the while, the glare has come off RFK Jr. No one's really talking about him. There were a lot of stories last week about his lifestyle as well, by the way, and some of the prior statements he's made. Axios now reporting that on the patio at Mar-a-Lago last night, Donald Trump, RFK Jr., and the chief executives of Pfizer, Eli Lilly, talking about finding cures for cancer, among other topics. Fascinating, because there's been a real freak out in the pharmaceutical industry that RFK Jr. could change their businesses meaningfully.
Yeah, so here's obviously the pharmaceutical companies making the case to RFK Jr. and the president what they have to contribute. And, to be fair, the Trump administration had this incredible program to get vaccines out with the pharmaceutical industry during the COVID pandemic. They had this warp speed program where they basically said, you know what, we're just going to buy all your stuff and just go ahead and make it while we check to see if it's safe.
Donald Trump wanted to put his name on the vaccine.
Yeah,
it's going to be the Trump vaccine.
So, and that was actually something that a lot of people around the world were like, hey, that was a great program. And that was faith in the pharmaceutical companies and essentially saying, look, just make the stuff. We'll take the risk that it doesn't work. And then we wound up, way ahead in terms of giving out the vaccine. So it's clearly the president doesn't have a bias against vaccines, whatever he might say, pharmaceuticals. So the pharmaceutical execs have something to work with, have some experience, and they're just trying to control things and lead things in the right way.
That must have been a heck of a dinner.
Yeah, there was a lot riding on it for their investors, and see how they did.
Yeah. You wonder what the CEOs of Pfizer and Eli Lilly order at dinner. They've got the GLP-1s. They can eat anything they want, right?
That's right.
Mike, thank you. It's good to see you. Mike Dorning, another roller coaster day in Washington, D.C. And we're just getting started here on the fastest show in politics. We've got a lot more to talk about with the DOGE, how that would be enacted and what it might mean for government spending, for deficits, for inflation. Also, the latest on a story no one is talking about. Billy Long to run the IRS. Remember, this was another agency said to be on the chopping block at one point. We've got an expert to weigh in on this coming up next here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
It is 12:21 on Wall Street. I'm Denise Pellegrini. We check the markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are mixed after yesterday's highs. Right now, the Dow down 147 points. S&P 500 up 4, NASDAQ up 53. The yield on the 10-year right now, it is also been moving, and right now the yield on the 10-year is 4.18%. Call it 4.19% right now on the 10-year. NYMEX crude right now, it is down just fractionally, 72.28 a barrel. And spot gold right now, it is down about 0.8%, 26.28 an ounce. And Nouriel Roubini, CEO Roubini Macro Associates, sees a lot of potential inflationary headwinds blowing our way right now.
Tariffs are inflationary. Protection is the risk of an economic war with China. First, draconian restriction to migration, if not mass deportation. If we have unfunded fiscal deficits and the promises imply $8 trillion of deficits additional over the next 10 years, that's going to crowd out growth by increasing interest rates, nominal and real, and the bond market vigilantes are going to wake up.
And Roubini there on Bloomberg Television. And speaking of inflation, Chipotle boosting menu prices. According to a Truist analyst, those shares are higher by about 3%. And that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Denise Pellegrini. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Denise, thank you so much. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Balance of Power. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg Radio. On the satellite and on YouTube, the Thursday edition brings us not only big questions about the Trump transition and the makeup of the Doge. It's Doge Day. Yeah, Elon's here, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy. Big happenings on what is a big week for holiday parties here in Washington. This is the big trade association party week. Everybody's feeling themselves, especially those who bought Bitcoin ahead of the election. $100,000, a couple of interesting numbers here. Bitcoin up over 30% since the election. This most recent romp we saw after Donald Trump announced his SEC pick yesterday to apparently put things over the top. We'll talk to Mike McGlone about that. But the digital asset up as much as 6.1% today, almost at $104,000 here. And check this out. The crypto market overall, you talk about the Trump effect, has jumped by roughly $1.3 trillion since Donald Trump's election victory on November 5th. Mike McGlone covers all of this for us at Bloomberg Intelligence, where he is senior commodity strategist and back with us now on Balance of Power. Mike, it's great to see you. This is a Trump story, correct? Would Bitcoin be at $100,000 if Kamala Harris won the election?
Probably not, Joe. I think you nailed it. It's the quintessential leader of the Trump trade. And the data we see lately is the SEC before might be considered the business prevention unit, most notably for cryptos. Now it's shifting the other way. So it's finally reached that milestone of $100,000. And the thing is, that should bring in, major investors, but they're already coming in big, because this year we're going to look back on not only the shift in Trump, he switched from a convert to a zealot, but also the launch of U.S. ETFs. And there's massive inflows in gold in U.S. Bitcoin ETFs.
Yes, right. There's talk, of course, about a national reserve, a Fort Knox, if you will, of Bitcoin. I know a lot of people are betting on that, hoping it will happen. How much is that expectation driving the price, or would that give Bitcoin a whole other leg up?
Well, it would if it happens, but it's also a low probability thing. Sure, first of all, there's been speculation that the U.S. would sell some of its gold to buy Bitcoin. Now, that's been one of my key premises for years, that it's really in somewhat... if you're a gold investor, you don't have Bitcoin in that space, you're missing out. But that would be kind of, I think, obnoxious to go further into debt to buy a highly speculative digital asset. But that's also what this space is famous for. It's famous for pretty pie-in-the-sky thoughts and things. It gets really expensive, and then it comes back and realizes, well, that's probably not a good idea. But the bottom line is the tilt. And the tilt is cryptos and Bitcoin were pressured for so long under Gary Gensler. And the quote I was using is, he made the mistake of going down in history as Aaron Burr, and looks like it's going that way.
Wow. Well, I look at the chart here, though, and I just wonder what the technical analysis is, because this looks pretty extended when you start looking at the moving averages. We've had a massive move here since November. On the other hand, we just broke through a very important resistance level, and I wonder, Mike, if that just means more gains.
Yeah, well, I love that technical analysis. If it goes up, it'll go up. That usually happens in the stock market. It happens in Bitcoin too. But this is a major threshold. I think the prudent investors are probably booking a few profits. As when it hits the tape as much. And when you got McGlone coming on tape talking about how great it is, you probably should sell a little bit. But the technical look is really for next is key support is now around 70. That's where it was before the breakout. I don't know if it gets there, but I think there'll be a lot of responsive buyers. And key resistance is now around 130. But the key thing is what happens in the next few weeks and months. Does it hover and does it convert what was milestone resistance at 100,000 to support? I think that's just a matter of time it does that.
So I think Mike McGlone just told us this could pull back to $70,000. What's the chance of that, Mike?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's going to take some kind of event. The bottom line for me, Joe, is that it hasn't had the big test. And the big test is when we have the next 10% correction in the stock market, which the last time was 2023, so it's been over a year. And typically, Bitcoin will drop about 3 times that. It'll drop 30 to 40%. Now, people tell me it's different this time, but I want to see it, and I think that's what a lot of prudent investors are doing. They're using Bitcoin as a bit of the alternative because stock market's getting expensive. Yeah. But the question is it more digital gold? Is it more just a speculative version of the stock market? I think it's a little bit of both. The key thing is we see significant inflows in Bitcoin and outflows sometimes in ETFs in gold. So the new digital gold is surpassing the old digital version, the old analog version.
This is fascinating. Just lastly, Mike, I appreciate all your time today. Is there a catch-up trade with Ether, or is this really a Bitcoin story?
Most people are looking at that. Here's the thing I used to say, Joe. First of all, there was Bitcoin, Ethereum, and 10,000 wannabes, and then there was 30,000 wannabes. Yeah. Now there's 1 million wannabes. So there's massive speculative excesses in the space, but there's only one digital version of gold, and that's Bitcoin.
What's Doge doing today, James? Are you watching it? You know, producer James is going to retire the south of France on his Dogecoin if he plays this right, Mike, and we've got Vivek Ramaswamy in town, Elon Musk in town. Look at this thing. This is another. It's up and to the right. But I think you just implied that that's one of the others. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm glad you went there because there's questions like what is going to happen? How is history going to view Doge and Shiba Inu are just jokes? And I think it's more tilted toward this is an example of the massive speculative excesses in space, and at some point it'll be purged.
Got it. Great to talk to you, Mike. Come back and see us more often because this is your time. Crypto time is here, and so is Mike McGlone of Bloomberg Intelligence, where he's senior commodity strategist and in high demand these days. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is just one part of the Trump story as we cover the transition here and make our way toward the new year with a stock market that seems to want to melt up but having trouble keeping up with crypto here. There's important news from overseas today. We're talking about France at this time yesterday, and I should mention that Emmanuel Macron will be speaking around 2 p.m. Eastern time following the no-confidence vote yesterday. But it's Syria that has our attention, as this group of rebel fighters inches ever closer to Damascus. The headline on the terminal, Syria rebels capture another key city in fresh blow to Assad. We've been relying heavily on Dan Flatley's reporting here and his expertise as Bloomberg's national security reporter. He's with us now. Dan, it's good to see you. At what point does Vladimir Putin say no more?
It's a great question, Joe. Of course, Putin has his own problems there, right? To his eastern flank with his invasion
of Ukraine. Is he the only one who stops this, though?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, he was a key part of how Bashar al-Assad was able to fend off this challenge many years ago now. And, looking at some of our reporting, there is some indication, some Russian officials have said we're monitoring the situation and we're trying to decide whether we need to intervene. Mm-hmm. But, as we discussed, they have a war, an invasion that they're prosecuting with their neighbor to the east, with Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They're having some trouble finding people to fight in that war at this point. Their economy is showing a little bit of more signs of stress than it may have been a few months ago. The U.S. is really trying to ramp up the economic pressure on Russia before Biden leaves office. So, it's a complicated picture, but Russia does have troops in the region. They have folks that they can rapidly deploy to that area. The question is it enough to really push these rebels back north? I suspect that as the rebels move further and further south, and Assad is in danger of losing some important supply and trade routes to the Mediterranean, that Russia may feel that they need to do something. But both Russia and Iran are otherwise occupied at the moment.
Yeah, we call them rebels. Dan, which almost brings a positive connotation. You think of the Rebel Alliance, but we're talking about a group here, Tahrir al-Sham, or I guess it's HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that was a former affiliate of al-Qaeda. What do we know about these people?
Well, you know, there's certainly one thing to keep in mind with these offshoot groups is that typically they are more extreme than their progenitors.
So these necessarily are not good guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, to the extent that they are threatening a very fragile stability in Syria, they are not good actors in that sense. You know, the political situation in Syria has been very volatile, very kind of up in the air over the last several years, as we know. And I think that, you know, when you look at the challenges that the U.S. has across the spectrum, we had kind of taken Syria off the table a little bit. Famously, Trump, when he was in office the first time, declared we're removing all U.S. troops from Syria. And this came as a surprise to folks on Capitol Hill and even some folks within the Defense Department at the time. And there was an outcry from officials about that move.
Yes.
So, you know, there's an argument, of course, that we're seeing playing out with some of the nominees on Capitol Hill with this notion of the U.S. needing to pull back and focus more at home and not, you know, be everywhere. The counter argument to that is you kind of need to be everywhere when stuff starts to happen.
Yeah, how true.
Which is one of the reasons why, you know, the Navy and the Marine Corps have ships that are, you know, sailing around the world at all times, ready to, you know, pre-position for evacuations, to intervene if necessary. So, you know, this is all going to be a basket of goods, if you will, that the former president and President-elect Trump will inherit very soon.
Is there a line, and I'm not going to use the term red line, but is there a line at which the Pentagon says, you know, we need to get involved here, and we start seeing airstrikes by U.S. aircraft?
In Syria?
Yeah.
I think that, you know, the red line has always been, famously, Obama had a red line about chemical weapons,
That's right? Sure.
And then there was no response when there were accusations of the use of chemical weapons in Syria in the early 2010s. And then Trump did carry out some airstrikes in 2018 with, you know, in response to alleged chemical weapons uses in Syria, or chemical weapons use in Syria. So that is the baseline red line, if you will, I think is this use of chemical weapons, violations of international law, that type of thing. As far as, you know, certainly not propping up Assad, but, you know, any type of intervention that would seek to maintain the status quo in Syria that would involve U.S. troops or U.S. airstrikes, I think we're very far from that at the moment.
This is at least maybe one reassuring thought that we have. Dan Flatley, it's good to see you, Dan. Thank you.
Sure.
A developing story that we'll keep tabs on for you, of course, here on the fastest show in politics. Breaking news on Boeing, the plea deal over a fatal 737 MAX jet crash rejected by a judge. Also rejecting a plea deal over a DEI provision at Boeing. We'll keep tabs on these stories as we make our way through hour one of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
is 12:40 on Wall Street. We check the markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. We have breaking news on Boeing, the plane maker's plea deal over that fatal 737 MAX crash. That has been rejected by a judge, and that is something that victims' families had been pressuring for. Also, separately, we have a separate Boeing headline. A judge has rejected a plea deal over DEI provisions. A Boeing judge has directed the company and DOJ to confer and set the next steps on that one. Boeing shares, they are down fractionally right now. Stocks overall, they are mixed. Some lingering inflation fears here, really. The Dow down 158 points. S&P 500 up 4, NASDAQ up 46. And we have this from Sonia Meshkin, senior economist, UBS. She says, watch for some volatility in U.S. inflation indicators between now and when the Fed wraps up its FOMC meeting December 18.
We think that there is going to be a bit of upside surprise in these numbers, primarily from used vehicles and insurance and apparel prices. But broadly speaking, if the labor market is roughly in balance, no longer a source of inflationary pressures, as the Fed has pretty much said, and we don't get more supply-side shocks, the inflation should continue to roughly, on the trajectory to 2%.
Meshkin there on Bloomberg Television. The yield on the 10-year right now, 4.18%. Spot gold right now, $26.24 an ounce. And Brent crude, West Texas crude, $68.31 a barrel right now. That is down about 0.3%. Shares of American Airlines and Southwest Airlines, they are both trading higher. American joining Southwest in raising its profit outlook for the final quarter of this year. That is thanks to a burst in holiday travel. And a lot of people not buying a whole lot of diamond rings and other jewelry right now. Signet Jewelers, that is the owner of Zales, K Jewelers, and other chains. It is lowering its full year outlook. For on-news demand, for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now whenever you get your podcasts. I'm Denise Pellegrini, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe.
Hey, Denise, thank you so much. Great to have you with us along for the ride today on the fastest show in politics. Indeed, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. It's the Thursday edition, and good to see you. Thanks for coming along on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite radio, and on YouTube. If I failed to mention, you can find us on YouTube right now. Just like every day, search Bloomberg Business News Live. It's kind of the coolest thing going. If you want to get to these shows, join us in the studio, see our guests. You'll actually see what Jeannie Shanzano looks like. So you're the richest man in the world, and you get on your jet, you come to Washington to save the day. You're going to cut $2 trillion as part of the Doge. Elon Musk, if you're Elon Musk, do you bring your son to the party? He brought his son to the meeting. He walked into the meeting with Senator John Thune with his young boy sitting on his shoulders, and what a story he's going to have to tell someday, huh? This is not really a department. Has anyone mentioned that yet? Doge stands for not only the coin, but the Department of Government Efficiency. And there is no department. It's kind of it's a panel, I guess. So connecting the dots between the Doge and actual legislation might be a longer walk than some are thinking. Then again, this is Trump's town. Trump's Congress and a lot of lawmakers looking to make him happy. So what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have to say must carry some weight, right? Let's find out from our panel. I mentioned Jeannie Shanzano. Yeah, she's here today. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And Chapin Fay is back, Republican strategist, founder of Lighthouse Public Affairs. Great to see you both here. I'm just going to bet both of you would bring your young child to Washington if you were the richest person in the world. Chapin Fay, does anyone listen to what comes out of this, not department, but panel?
I think so. Listen, Donald Trump is about to do what conservatives have been trying and talking about doing for decades, right? He's going to disrupt the government. And I think a lot of the ideas and a lot of the ways to implement these policies are going to come out of, the Department of Government Efficiency, like you said, however that looks, right? Whether it has teeth or not is really going to be up to the legislature. But again, Republicans won. I think Donald Trump is heading into the White House in January with a mandate to do the things that he said he was going to do and disrupt some of these government institutions that are no longer serving Americans. And I think that's exactly what they're going to do. And Elon and Vivek are going to be sort of tip of the spear of that.
Well, it's a tall order, Jeannie, when you start getting down to the math here. I mean, $2 trillion, my God, it would be impossible to do that without starting to eat into entitlements. And so far, there's been no appetite to do that, not just on Capitol Hill, but in Washington. Neither of the presidential campaigns would go near Social Security and Medicare. In fact, the president was going to lift taxes on some of these benefits, right? So how does this come together in the form of law?
Yeah, first of all, Joe, I would take that very cute kid, and it's going to soften the blow when they have to make these tough decisions. I think Elon Musk is on to something as usual. Very cute kid. But, you know, the reality is, I said before, I will repeat again, they need somebody like Maya McGinnis to hold their feet to the fire. You know, the fact is that when you look at the federal budget, 62% of it is mandatory spending. And you're absolutely right. Both, you know, the Democrats and then President Trump, they ran through this campaign saying things like they won't touch Social Security, won't touch Medicare, won't touch all of these things. And so substantial cuts, particularly in the $2 trillion range, would be impossible if you don't start to have a serious conversation about that. That said, I think Democrats have to be very, very careful here. The idea is right. And the notion that you need to cut, the notion that you need to streamline the federal government is exactly right. And so Democrats can't get caught in this trap of, you know, looking the other way and saying all of these ideas are wrong. They have to be reformers as well, and they have to hold these people's feet to the fire when they talk about these cuts, but they should support smart streamlining and cuts as well. They just obviously are not going to talk about, you know, destroying the Department of Education overall.
You know, bringing the kid, we call that pulling a Shirley around here at Balance of Power. You both know it's a long story. When you show them the picture of the cute child before you deliver the bad news. Chapin Fay, Senator Marsha Blackburn thinks that she's got this worked out. I will be introducing legislation, she just put this on Twitter, that coincides with DOJ's plan. My DOJ Act will freeze federal hiring, begin the process to relocate agencies out of the D.C. swamp, she says, and establish a merit-based salary system for the federal workforce. Could something like that pass?
Listen, I think those are all great ideas, and I think it will bring this federal government closer to the people that it's supposedly serving. And you know, those of us on the right believe that it has stopped serving Americans for a long time. Are they achievable? They are very ambitious goals, and Democrats have in the past, you know, been really entrenched on behalf of government employees and benefits and sort of the DC culture in our nation's capital. So I do think there's going to be a fight right in the Senate. Democrats can certainly hold up legislation and work to get compromises and shape the bills. In the House, of course, it's majority rules pretty much. So there shouldn't be too much of an issue there as long as the Republicans hold on to their slim majority. But I do think those are ambitious goals, like you said, and I do think there will be some fights. There will be definitely some public affairs battles over, I think, probably a lot of these ideas and a lot of the things, particularly coming out of DOJ, just because, you know, change is scary for a lot of people, and change is certainly scary for the establishment and incumbents. So it's gonna, I do think there are going to be some battles. I do think some of that stuff does have a chance and a shot. I mean, moving an agency out of DC, right? That's probably a lot easier than, you know, a hiring freeze or changing civil service rules and regulations. But I think they're all the right ideas, and I think there's going to be a fight, and I think it's a worthy discussion to have regardless.
How about bringing people back to work in the office 5 days a week, Jeannie? This is actually one of the few specific suggestions that we've heard from Musk and Ramaswamy, not only out of fairness, they say, in the spirit of productivity, but also might thin the herd a little bit. A lot of people don't want to come back to work 5 days a week, and that might result in a lower head count. What do you think?
It can, absolutely, and we've seen that, throughout the country and in other organizations. We've also seen, and they've talked about, enticing people to retire early. So retirement packages, that also can work. The problem is they have to curb their enthusiasm. When they talk $2 trillion in cuts, you could cut out the entire workforce almost, and it wouldn't approach that. And so it is the, scope of what they're talking about that they may not be able to reach. I wouldn't count against them. These are two guys who have been insanely successful in their other aspects of their professional lives. But the reality is, this process is still very unclear. They are not, as you said, part of the government. I loved when Donald Trump said this was like the Manhattan Project. Okay, that is a lofty goal, but what is the process? These cuts, for the most part, would have to go through Congress. You're talking about a House with maybe even just a 1-seat majority at some points. You're talking about a Senate and a House that already the GOP is disagreeing. Do we start with tax cuts? Do we start with Donald Trump's non-tax cuts? So the priorities. So how do you do this and do this in a 2-year period? Because of course, Donald Trump said they will shut down Doge by July, I think it's 2026. So a lot to do in a short period of time. Worthy goal, but the devil is in the details here, and we haven't heard any of these details yet.
As always. Okay, so the other specific idea that we had, beyond the broad cut $2 trillion, we had bring people back in the office 5 days a week, the federal workforce, and then do away with daylight savings. Now, this is something that's come up before. Ask Ed Markey about it, his pet issue. I think Marco Rubio signed onto that bill as well. Look, I don't know if we're going to favor sun in the morning or sun later in the day here, Chapin Faye, but would that actually make a difference?
I do think it would make a difference. What that difference is, I think, is anybody's guess. If it stays sunnier or lighter out during the day for us, I think that's I would support it. And of course, time zones, can cause difficulty. But I don't know that this is a fight that they really want to get into, considering some of the earlier things that we talked about that are going to be fights that I think are real, will have an immediate and real substantial impact on making the government more efficient. I don't know if this one will do that. But again, I think people could support it if it will help that personally.
Yeah, look, this has come up before. As I mentioned, Jeannie, Ed Markey made a cause around this whole idea. You're an educator. This actually was a big part of the reason why we do this, is so kids weren't going to school in the dark in the morning. I feel like I'm setting up some kind of online poll here. If you like it late in the morning or in the afternoon, we can all weigh in on that later. But is this something we should be spending time talking about?
Probably not. I do recall, like in high school, Joe Matthew, you and I growing up in Connecticut, I had to get on that bus. It was pitch black. It was very
pitch
scary.
Black, yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, there is, but I think, am I correct, Joe, that some of our colleagues in the more vacation spots, they're not keen on this idea. So there's a plus and a minus here. But to Chapin's point, the reality is, this probably isn't going to get you near where you need to be to address the serious problems in our budget deficit. So yes, for the kids, we can think about it, but I think we need to look elsewhere. Entitlements.
In a series of posts on X, both entrepreneurs, Musk and Ramaswamy, went there. Musk declaring Americans want the United States to, quote, abolish the annoying time changes, unquote. Ramaswamy described the practice as inefficient and easy to change, unquote. Here's my question for you, Chapin. And you guys, can you imagine being Chapin and Jeannie and have to answer the questions that Joe has every day about this wacky stuff? Does Elon Musk get bored? I mean, really, where's Elon Musk 6 months down the road here when he's got a rocket company, he's got X, he's got a lot of stuff going on, Chapin?
Listen, maybe his son can carry this argument, and that could be his pet issue, the daylight savings issue.
Well done.
That might be the way to get it done. I do not think he gets bored. I think these are very talented, smart, thoughtful men, and they care right now about government efficiency. And I think that they're going to do their best at trying to execute Trump's vision of this. And I think they are the two people that can do it. I mean, Elon Musk is literally a rocket scientist, right? And is doing things that we, didn't think possible a year ago. So I think these are the exact right people to be looking at government, right? One of the problems in government is that it's not innovative, most of it, right? There's no innovation in the Department of Education. It's one of the agencies where there's just innovation is frowned upon, right? So continuity of government is good. Innovation and change every now and then is better.
Doge Day with Jeannie Shanzano and Chapin Fay. Our great panel will have a lot more to talk about coming up as we turn to the transition. Pete Hegseth back on the Hill today. They'll be with us in our second hour here on Balance of Power, as we also welcome our global television audience to the conversation. Stay with us right here. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. D.C.
The richest man in the world arrives in Washington to try to fix it. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Elon Musk makes his way through the Capitol, meeting with lawmakers alongside his partner Vivek Ramaswamy in an effort to cut up to $2 trillion in government spending. Welcome to Doge Day in Washington. I'm Joe Matthew, and this is the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. We're going to get the latest in just a moment from Jack Fitzpatrick at Bloomberg Government. We'll have insights from Rosemary Becky at Brownstein, and we'll have analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor and Democratic analyst Jeannie Sheehan Zaino is with us, along with Republican strategist Chapin Fay from Lighthouse Public Affairs. Indeed, it's Doge Day. The big buzz today inside the Beltway. Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, meeting with lawmakers today to walk through their plan that is bringing more questions than answers at the moment. Where the cuts will come from, how it will become law. It's something that Speaker Mike Johnson was asked about earlier today. Here he is.
We do have to scale back the size and scope of government. It serves the people. It unleashes the free market again. Our policy changes will be a part of that, but I think that if we can make some dramatic changes in downsizing the scale and scope of these things, we'll go a long way. And
so two specific examples, Planned Parenthood and PBS, are in congressional control. Are you planning to axe both of those?
I would like to, that's for sure.
Spending for both of those?
Yeah, we got to build consensus to have the votes to do that.
And just like that, we're right back to cutting Big Bird. Let's get into it with Jack Fitzpatrick, our appropriations expert at Bloomberg Government. He's on Capitol Hill today as well for an important series of meetings with these two individuals. Jack, it's great to have you back. I see Senator Marsha Blackburn has raised her hand to begin potentially drafting some legislation that would include the findings or recommendations of this panel. But that's the point here, right? It's not a department, it is a panel, and there's no clear path for any of these ideas to become law.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. You mentioned Senator Blackburn. Senator Joni Ernst started the Senate caucus, the Doge caucus. Aaron Bean, Republican from Florida in the House, started a House caucus. A lot of people want to be involved. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and there were big promises made regarding $2 trillion in cuts. But this is basically a think tank or an advisory board, and Republicans are happy to hear their ideas, but there are a lot of limitations on how you put those ideas into law. If you want to cut huge dollars from the federal budget, you're probably looking at Social Security or Medicaid, Medicare or Medicaid, not easy things to legislate. You can't just pull it from the annual budget. So there have been some warnings from key members. Susan Collins, who's the incoming appropriations chair, said she wants to hear their ideas, she respects them, but this is not business, this is government, and it works differently than private enterprise.
Well, Jack, this is your wheelhouse. You specialize in appropriations. If one were to cut $2 trillion out of government spending, what would it mean for our budget? What would it mean for the economy?
It would be huge. The $2 trillion number comes from Elon Musk at that Madison Square Garden event. He was asked, how much can you cut from the annual budget, which was $6.75 trillion last year. So cutting almost a third of federal spending would be wild. It would require massive overhauls of popular entitlement programs. The stuff they've talked about, finding efficiencies in Department of Defense contracting, that doesn't do it. So we should acknowledge up front some of the campaign promises and rhetoric were not realistic. But if we do take them at their word that they're being very ambitious, the things you'd have to look at are popular entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare. Social Security has to be bipartisan. You can't do that through reconciliation. So there are some huge stumbling blocks, and the reality check is probably going to be difficult when they actually start talking about legislating any of this.
Which brings us to your column earlier today, the headlines, Schoolhouse Doge. Musk and Ramaswamy talk cuts on Capitol Hill. Your point here not only is talk cheap, Jack, but maybe everybody needs to go back to school here on how a bill is written.
Yeah, well, look, they can rewrite some of the things on how a bill is written. The expanding use of budget reconciliation to get around the Senate filibuster is as significant as it has ever been. Republicans are talking about how many spending cuts can we find to offset the impact of extending tax cuts. So there's some reality to Republicans saying, we're going to do something significant, we're going to cut a lot of spending. They're not going to do it with Democrats. But $2 trillion and the idea of wading into major entitlement reform does not seem realistic because they've talked so much about it already and no one has taken action lately.
Well, so what do the old timers say here? And I say that with all due respect. You talk to the appropriations experts, including the chairman, Tom Cole. Does he want to see everybody go back to Schoolhouse Rock? What does he think of these ideas?
They've offered some reminders that Congress controls the power of the purse. You don't set up a think tank or an advisory board and then just put Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in charge of the federal budget. So there's a warning there. Cole also said earmarks don't add up to that much money anyway, so we're not touching those. We're not getting rid of that. Susan Collins said she is very interested in looking at telework and getting federal employees back in person or saving money on federal leases. So there are some ideas, there's some enthusiasm, but a lot of warnings that ideas are one thing, but it's still Congress that makes the decisions regarding federal spending.
Well, the two most specific ideas that we've heard would include one you just mentioned, bringing workers back into the office 5 days a week, knowing that a lot of federal workers are still doing the work from home bit. Also eliminating daylight savings time. That seemed to be a cause that both Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy wanted to endorse. In terms of the first one, though, you seem to think that's something that actually has enough support in Washington. Would it result in a lower headcount because many federal workers do not want to return to the office?
You know, that's something that Republicans have brought up, but they've gone back and forth because on one hand, it may result in people leaving and not being replaced, and you have a smaller workforce through attrition. But also Republicans themselves, including relevant appropriators, Steve Womack has brought this up, has said, you know, we could save a lot of money by embracing some telework, not paying as much through the General Services Administration on federal leases. Telework can be used as an efficiency, and Republicans, though they're interested in cracking down on inappropriate telework and excessive locality pay for people who don't actually live in D.C., they have to choose a direction. Are you bringing back everybody full-time, or are you looking for savings through efficient telework sometimes? So that's another area where they have to make some more specific decisions rather than just identifying this issue.
Got it. Jack, it's great to have you back. Good to see you. Jack Fitzpatrick with a busy day on Capitol Hill. We didn't even get to the funding deadline that is looming, by the way, December 20th. We're 15 days out, and there is still no deal on top lines on how to avoid a shutdown. So the logic at this point is we kick the can into early next year so we could kick the can again, presumably until March. That is the buzz at the moment here on Capitol Hill. As Elon Musk continues his stride across the Capitol with Vivek Ramaswamy, I'm drawn to a quote in this morning's Punch Bowl tip sheet. A senior Republican talking with Punch Bowl about this idea. Two people, they say, who know nothing about how the government works, pretending they can cut $1 trillion, both with decent pulpits to preach from. And the ear of an unpredictable president? Disaster. The only good thing is at some point they'll overpromise and get bounced by Trump. But until then, disaster, said this senior Republican aide. Gives you a sense of what we're heading for in the new year as we add the voice of Rosemary Becky, a conversation we've been looking forward to as we try to bring you voices of experts, people with experience that might have seen these movies before. Tax attorney with Brownstein, former tax counsel to the Senate Finance Committee. Rosemary, it's great to have you. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. Will DOGE result in a smaller government?
So it quite possibly could. There could be some great recommendations that come out of it to make our government a little bit smaller.
Well, $2 trillion, of course, is a lot smaller. And I wonder if this falls into the category of a lot of things involving Donald Trump, that the opening salvo is just that. And that at some point there will be maybe some spending cuts that they can take credit for. Is that how this goes?
Yeah, and so how this process is all going to play out is initially the Doge is going to be set up as an advisory committee, and I think your prior guest talked a little bit about this. And so it will be set up as an advisory committee to OMB, and it will provide recommendations as the president puts forward his budget for 2026.
So how does it play out then when it comes time to actually crafting a budget? I mentioned the stopgap. We're going to go through this kicking the can. But at some point, likely by March, I think is the conventional wisdom on Capitol Hill, there will be a budget crafted, dare I say, using regular order, but I don't want to get too crazy here, but will actually have Donald Trump's fingerprints on them. Is that how he implements what we hear from Musk and Ramaswamy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so this advisory committee will make recommendations to OMB, and ultimately it'll be up to the president and OMB to put together a budget proposal that they'll send up to Capitol Hill, and then it's up to lawmakers, right, to craft a budget and to go through the appropriations process. And so, hard to say at this point, which recommendations will be taken into account. And it may be some recommendations are held back or further developed as they look at other budget spending proposals like a tax bill. Maybe you save some of the proposals for that exercise.
Sure. That was really the genesis of this, right? When the idea of extending or making permanent the Trump tax cuts came about, everyone cried deficit spending, bigger deficits, maybe higher inflation. And then we heard this idea about the Doge. Is it the answer to higher deficits?
Well, it's certainly part of a process to pay for the tax bill, right? Is looking for ways to cut spending as an offset to cutting those taxes. It will cost, in order to extend all of the 2017 expiring provisions, it's going to cost a net number of $4.6 trillion. And so hopefully you can use some government savings to pay for that process and the extension of those tax cuts.
Do you believe Donald Trump actually wants to cut spending? Did his first administration show us a pattern there?
Oh, absolutely. I think that people are looking for real change. They're looking to see our economy expand, to create jobs. And so I do think that they are going to be looking at cutting government spending. And as I said before, I think that it'll be part of just the general budget process, and we could see some of those additional cuts appear as part of a tax bill or other budget processes.
Rosemary, you started your government career at the IRS, which gives you unique perspective on everything we're talking about here, including, by the way, Donald Trump's new pick to run the IRS, which I want to ask you about. But this agency is at the center of so much strife in Washington. Many Republicans wanted to pull back the funding that the Biden administration had given, saying that you'd have armed agents knocking on your doors. Are you concerned about the image, the way the IRS has been framed by people, what is in fact an agency that's woefully underfunded?
I'm not concerned about it because I think that it's a perfect example of where there's inefficiencies and an agency that hasn't run well and hasn't served the taxpayers well. And so I think what President Trump is looking to do is to bring in a fresh set of eyes and to take another look at ways to make that agency more efficient. And again, just automating that agency isn't the answer. We really, need taxpayer services and people to help taxpayers. I think that's where the real frustration is at with Americans.
Well, we do have a name, Billy Long, former congressman from Missouri, named yesterday by Donald Trump to lead the Internal Revenue Service. I'm a little bit confused here, Rosemary. You might think this is a great pick or not, but don't we have an IRS commissioner already?
We do. And he has a 5-year term, and he is confirmed by the Senate. I suspect there will be a lot of pressure for him to leave his position, in which case then, this nomination could move forward.
What can Mr. Long, assuming he gets this job, do then to make the IRS a more efficient agency, one that works better, one that Republicans will not be allergic to?
I think it's about making sure that agents are trained properly, that automation isn't actually running the agency. I think that there is so much that can be done in terms of, again, providing real service to taxpayers and helping people get their questions answered. I feel like time and time again, you're hearing about people getting notices and being frustrated with the process because there's no one that can answer their questions and help them with notices that they receive in the mail. So I do think there's a real opportunity to take a hard look at this agency and make some change.
What do you expect in terms of the tax debate here? And it's funny, we've been talking about tax reform and reforming the tax code, Rosemary, for a lot of years. Remember when it was going to fit on a postcard? What will this debate look like when it comes to extending the Trump tax cuts? And will it include all of the exemptions that he rolled out on the campaign trail? No taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime. I could keep going. I haven't even mentioned SALT yet. What will the final product look like?
The final product is probably going to be a combination of extending the 2017 tax cuts, as well as making good on a lot of the campaign promises. And I think what we're also going to see is maybe looking again at different ways to pay for that. Again, whether it's through tariffs or through further cutting government spending. But there's going to be some trade-offs, and it's going to be a really hard process. You're talking about members who are definitely concerned about deficits and debt. And so that's all got to be taken into account during this process.
Just quickly, one more as we get ready for the confirmation process, or whatever we're going to call this, for Billy Long, assuming there is a change here at the top of the IRS, because it can't result in a firing, as you've pointed out. This former congressman spent a long time dealing with the pandemic-era tax credit. I want to be exact about this. The employee retention tax credit, which has been very controversial, and a lot of lawmakers tried to shut down. Will that make it problematic for him to get this job?
I don't think it'll make him problematic. I think it's certainly, he'll have to answer questions about it. It is certainly a program that needs to be looked at and reevaluated. And frankly, probably they need to learn from that experience. So that'll all be part of his confirmation process.
I'm glad you could join us. Rosemary Becky, tax attorney with Brownstein. We thank you for the insights, as always, here on Balance of Power. We'll follow the beat on Billy Long for you in the future of the IRS. It's Doge Day, but we have other transition elements to talk about with Pete Hegseth back on Capitol Hill. We'll assemble our political panel next for their take on that. Chapin Fay and Jeannie Shanzano on the way here on Bloomberg.
listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Great to have you with us on the Thursday edition. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining here on Bloomberg TV and radio and on YouTube, where you can always find us by searching Bloomberg Business News Live. For those of you watching today, we open there with a picture of the Capitol, which is a very busy place. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are making rounds on this Doge Day. Yes, it is all about the Department of Government efficiency, and they're meeting with lawmakers to try to start a conversation about finding as much as, according to Elon Musk, $2 trillion in government spending to cut. But reminder, this is not actually a department. It's a panel that will deliver recommendations to a Congress that has a very difficult time saving money. That's one thing that we're following today, along with the travels of Pete Hegseth. He's back in the Senate today, having woken up to a series of stories in major newspapers, front pagers in the Washington Post and the New York Times, specifically about his history and behavior with alcohol. And we did hear from Pete Hegseth following some of his meetings, suggesting that he spoke with Donald Trump as early and as recently as this morning, saying that they are still full-throated here and leaning into this nomination. We heard as well from Joni Ernst, the senator, Republican senator, who is said to potentially be the one to decide the fate of Pete Hegseth. Of course, a veteran who has gone to great lengths to make sexual assault a critical issue in the military. And of course, as a female combat veteran, might have some issues with Pete Hegseth's previous comments about women in combat. Let's listen to Joni Ernst following her meeting with Pete Hegseth.
I did have a very long, lengthy discussion with Pete yesterday, and I do appreciate his service to the nation. I also am a combat veteran. So we talked about a number of those issues, and we will continue with the vetting process.
It doesn't sound on your answer that you've gotten to a yes. If I'm wrong about that, correct me. And if that is the case, it sounds to me as if the hearing will be critical for his nomination. Am I right about that?
I think you are right. I think for a number of our senators, they want to make sure that any allegations have been cleared, and that's why we have to have a very thorough vetting process.
Joni Ernst on Fox News earlier today, as we assemble our political panel for their take on this. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino is back with us, of course, Bloomberg politics contributor, Democratic analyst, and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Joined today by Republican strategist Chapin Fay, the founder of Lighthouse Public Affairs. Great to see you both. Jeannie, I guess the question is, when you hear a conversation like that, will Pete Hegseth ever get to a vote? Will there be a hearing?
Yeah, you know, I would never say this normally, Joe, but I actually, listening to that, felt a little bit bad for Pete Hegseth. You know, clearly, after you meet with a senator who seems to hold much of this in the palm of her hand, like Joni Ernst, you don't want to hear what she had to say on Fox today. She was reticent. She was clearly not at a yes, at least not yet. She's talking about continuing with the process. And of course, the reality is, her name is also being floated along with Ron DeSantis's for this very job. So, you know, imagine Pete Hegseth, he's got to talk to her saying he doesn't even want women in combat, walking back from that. She's been in combat. She's been the victim of sexual harassment and sexual assault. She's clearly a very powerful senator. So this is not what you want to hear. His, you know, every sort of like phrase you can think of, his nomination on life support, you know, that's what's been floated. And I think that accurately sums up what's happening. He's trying to push this in the last day or so by going on the offensive, but this is an uphill battle for him.
Well, so are these just hit pieces, Chapin? How are you reading this? I mentioned the Washington Post. It's got a story up. Hegseth's own account, they say. His heavy drinking began after a brush with death with an RPG ricocheted off his vehicle. The New York Times, by the way, a day after NBC News suggested employees at Fox were concerned about Hegseth's drinking. The New York Times today says he even got pulled into Human Resources after acting out at a Fox and Friends Christmas party. His heavy drinking and raucous behavior at events escalated into episodes, they say, addressed by company officials or coworkers. What do you make of this? Because he told Megyn Kelly last night if he ever actually got this deployment to be the next Secretary of Defense, a drop of alcohol would not cross his lips.
Listen, you asked if these are hit pieces. Absolutely. Of course they are. When you put, we're in the palace intrigue transitional phase and it comes from both sides, right? Jeannie mentioned Senator Ernst has been floated as a possible nominee. That could just be palace intrigue to make her vote no, right? And again, what she said today was there's a process. There's a vetting process. There's going to be a hearing, and hearings matter in these types of cases. I mean, you saw Brett Kavanaugh had similar issues, and he was vetted, and there was a contentious, public discussion about it, and he ultimately was confirmed. And I think the headwinds of Trump's, mandate that he got to disrupt the government is going to put a lot of pressure on these senators, including Senator Ernst, to let him have a chance to have his people to do the job that he wants them to do. And again, some media reports today are saying that there are no no's among senators behind closed doors. Of course, the senator has every right and should be saying those things, right? There's a process, and we're going to find out if these are just accusations of palace intrigue or if there's some teeth there and he has some problems. I do think also there's a kindred spirit thing here. President Trump has gone through these similar allegations. He denies them, right? And has sort of survived, not sort of, but has survived, is now the president-elect. And I think he may see a kindred spirit in Pete Hegseth. And again, I think a lot of these are distractions that the American people and the American voters rejected, right? If you listen to the mission, Pete Hegseth has said repeatedly that his philosophy would be there's only one requirement to work at the Department of Defense, and that's your ability to fight wars, right? And getting rid of the DEI and the woke stuff from the generals. That's important. That's why Trump was elected. So I think Pete Hegseth does have a shot. I think he's going to get a hearing. Whether he's confirmed, of course, is up to the United States Senate, as is their prerogative.
Well, we know, of course, kindred spirit, maybe potentially with the sexual assault allegations, but we know Donald Trump does not drink, and he's turned off reportedly by alcohol, Jeannie, after he lost a brother to alcoholism. And I wonder to what extent we need to be a little bit more straight about this part of the story. Remember when Lloyd Austin went into surgery and he refused anesthesia? This is a job where you have to be ready for the call 24 hours a day. This is not for a normal person, essentially. And I wonder if we're asking for an exception here, Jeannie, and if these stories are properly framing this issue.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the many questions. If he does go into the confirmation process and he has a hearing, if he continues rather in the confirmation process and has a hearing, that's one of the many tough questions that he is going to be asked, and he's going to have to defend himself. The problem for Pete Hegseth is like fourfold. Number one, he is at the top of every news story every day, and that's not where you want to be in a confirmation process. He has been forced to even send his mother out to defend himself. Not where you want to be in a confirmation process. And this is not just about personal challenges, as important as they are, about, womanizing, about sexual assault allegations, about issues of drinking on the job. This is also about his ability to run the most important department, to be in the line of the presidency, which he would be if he was confirmed, and to have the nuclear codes at his beck and call. I mean, this is a very serious issue. And let's not forget on the drinking, that was what got John Tower. And so I do think this is something that if he goes to a hearing, which I am not sure he will at this point, he is going to have to defend all of those things. And I think with as narrow as the Senate is, it is not far-fetched to imagine you will get more than 3 Republican senators who will say, the national security is too serious. We're too volatile a time in the world to take a chance on this guy. There are far better nominees out there. And Donald Trump may decide the same. So I think it's going to be, those people and also Donald Trump who may pull the plug on this.
Jeannie Shanzano and Chapin Fay, great panel and a great conversation. Thank you so much for bringing both sides to these issues for us today on Balance of Power. About a half an hour from now, just a quick heads up here on Bloomberg TV and radio, we're expecting to be hearing some remarks from Emmanuel Macron. Around this time yesterday, we were gearing up for what turned out to be a no-confidence vote that ended the political career of the Prime Minister, ended the government there as we know it, and raised great questions about the future, the political future for Emmanuel Macron. Fascinating to hear this morning from Marine Le Pen, of course, a central figure here. Her far-right National Rally Party joined forces with a coalition of liberal groups to oust this government, and she sat down today exclusively with Bloomberg to talk about this and Emmanuel Macron's future. Listen.
What I said was that the president's resignation is a personal decision for him and can only take place, in my view, when a political crisis happens or an institutional crisis can no longer have any other solution than the resignation of the president of the republic. What I do wish, on the other hand, because for sure there will be new legislative elections in the next few months, is that we work on a voting system by then that enables us to have a real majority, whatever that majority may be. But the country needs a majority. It can't live for months and years with 3 blocs, which in reality can't implement a policy.
Fascinating conversation with our own Francine Lacqua. Stephen Carroll joins us now for more, the host of Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio, who has been looming large over this story since early this week. Stephen, it's great to have you back. What would that majority look like?
I mean, at the moment, it's pretty unclear, to be honest. And it's interesting to hear Marine Le Pen qualify what she expects Emmanuel Macron to do, because in that interview, Francine asked her what would her voters, National Rally voters, want to hear from the president. And she laughed and said that he goes. And then she kind of, put that in more couched language that, of course, it's his decision, the president, and she's right in saying that nobody can force him out of his job. He's still in place till 2027. But building that majority is the key challenge in the short term for the next prime minister, because as we heard Marine Le Pen mention there can't be new legislative elections here in France until next summer. She does want to see a prime minister named and put in place to try and pass some policies before then, but that would involve, of course, trying to build out from the centre, either going further right or further left. And we're hoping that the appointment of a prime minister will give us an indication of which direction Emmanuel Macron wants that to go in.
We're expecting to hear from Emmanuel Macron about a half an hour from now. Stephen, what will he say?
Well, according to French media reports, at the moment, they are not expecting him to name a prime minister in that address to the nation. So what we're expecting him to do is to say that he has the situation in hand, that he has a vision for what the country will do next, and that he will let us know what exactly it's going to look like. But it's no easy feat to find somebody who can look at the parliamentary arithmetic and say they can build a majority or at least a working minority. And that's what politicians from all sides of the spectrum have been out today discussing, whether or not there is a possibility that such a working minority can be formed. They all say that, of course, they could work together if the conditions are right, if the policies are right. But the idea of those policies still remain pretty divergent. So tough challenge ahead.
That's right. We'll have ears on the speech coming up a short time from now. Stephen Carroll, thank you so much, our asset, helping to cover this story from Paris, the host of Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Stay with us on the fastest show in politics on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Thanks for joining us on the fastest show in politics, Thursday edition of Balance of Power. We're live in Washington, where it's been a pretty busy day around here. It's Doge Day. On the fastest show in politics, that means the Department of Government Efficiency. Yes, we're following the coin as well. It's actually doing pretty well. As Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy meet with lawmakers today, we're told they're going to be holding a news conference, or at least making a statement a bit later on following their meetings. And we'll hear what they have to say, knowing that Elon Musk has promised to find a way to cut some $2 trillion out of the federal budget. While we're at it, by the way, 15 days from now, we will not have a federal budget. The government will run out of money. So there's also an effort underway to try to craft a stopgap to get us through the new year here without a government shutdown. One of the big stories that we've been talking about with regard to geopolitics, our eyes on China and the intersection with politics, policy, and technology, is the tit for tat that we have been seeing when it comes to access to some of the most advanced technology, and in this case, many cases at least, chips from companies like NVIDIA that are helping to create this new age of artificial intelligence. China ratcheting up trade tensions with the ban on rare earths, and this tit for tat that not a lot of people saw bringing equity to the situation. But Gregory Allen, who runs the Wadhwani AI Center at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, embarked on a great project, because we talk a lot here on Bloomberg about the impact of these export controls and what they will mean for our relationships and our economies, but nowhere do we really get answers on what that impact will be. And that's what Gregory Allen set out to find. It's great to see you. Welcome back. Nice to see you at the table here at Bloomberg.
It's wonderful to be back.
This is a big, squishy story, so we can go in a lot of different directions here, and you're a real expert. So I want to start with the most recent turn in this tit for tat with China. We're trying to keep technology out of their hands, and they're trying to keep rare earths out of ours. But we don't buy all of that from China, do we?
No. So China is a really strong supplier in the world's rare earth market. Most of their strength is actually as a refiner, not as a miner. So while they have really strong market share in most of the mining, in terms of owning the mines around the world that produce rare earths, where they really dominate is in refining capacity. And what we've seen with the most recent round of export controls coming out of China, so this is their restricting sales to America, is on gallium and germanium. But I would say it's actually not nearly as strong as what the United States has done to China. And there's two reasons for that. The first of which is gallium and germanium are natural byproducts of aluminum and zinc mining, which means just about anybody who right now today is mining aluminum or zinc could get into the business of gallium or germanium if they wanted to.
Fascinating.
Now, once they have all that ore, they're going to have to find a refinery to ship it to. And right now, China dominates the world of refining. So the question is, are these export controls that China has put in place scary enough that somebody in the West is actually going to start putting the money into building local refining capacity for these metals? And that could take a year or two to set up, and then China might flood the market later to sort of destroy that investment.
Is that a NIMBY story? Is it like, I mean, we're actually hearing Democrats warm up to the idea of opening new nuclear power plants to help to provide power for AI data centers, for instance. It sounds like everything is being considered again.
Well, I think in the United States' case, we don't necessarily need it to happen in the United States. Of course, there's folks who would love for that to be the case for the jobs or for the strategic positioning, et cetera. But what we really need, more than we need American sources, are just non-Chinese sources.
Are those in Africa?
In terms of where the metals are, that's actually almost everywhere. And here I'm talking specifically about gallium and germanium. Again, anywhere you mine aluminum or zinc.
But those processing facilities, right? We're paying for this transcontinental railroad. Maybe that's the next source for these.
So that's the point, is you could put these refining sources anywhere. And some developing countries, such as Indonesia, which are strong in mining certain metals, have expressed an interest in getting into the refining market. The problem is on the investor side, because they're asking themselves, if we put up the money for a refinery, is China just going to flood the market, depress prices so that our refinery goes out of business? So they're going to be looking for long-term purchase agreements with U.S. customers that are going to ensure that they're still going to have access.
Fascinating.
There's one other thing here that I think is really worth pointing out, and this is research done by your colleague at Bloomberg, Gerard DePippo, who has pointed out that there's really a lot of circumvention of Chinese export controls going on right now, because U.S. purchases from China have obviously plummeted in the wake of these export controls, but Chinese exports to Europe have surged, and Chinese exports from Europe to the United States have also surged. And so China is getting a little bit of a taste of its own medicine when it comes to working to evade export controls.
Nice hat tip to Gerard. His team is doing amazing work over there. China wants to have its own industry. It wants to get the chip making equipment that we don't want it to have. When you put the walls around China's chip manufacturing capacity, how far behind the U.S. is it, and how could it catch up?
So there's multiple ways you can think about this. The first is in the types of equipment. What do you need to actually put in the chip fabrication facility to operate that facility? The one that's best known is the lithography equipment. This is sort of using light to print the design on the chip, but there's also advanced deposition equipment, advanced etching equipment, and China's positioning differs in these different categories of equipment. They're dramatically behind in lithography equipment. In some sub-niches of deposition and etching equipment, they're still good, although they're quite a bit behind the global state-of-the-art, as represented by what the United States companies can do, what the Japanese companies can do, what the Dutch companies can do.
How can China get that equipment, American-made equipment, potentially through other countries? There's a lot of ways to backdoor this stuff, as we have seen.
Yes, exactly. And of course, the American equipment companies, the point that they're making is, hey, if other countries are going to sell this, we want to be able to sell it too. So that's why they're really concerned about the export controls occurring in a unilateral basis, because then there's no strategic impact on China, and there's a loss of sale by U.S. companies. And so in earlier tranches of export controls, what you've seen is U.S. firms actually increasing their shipments of semiconductor manufacturing equipment coming out of the countries to which they have outsourced some of their manufacturing. So it's no longer a U.S. export, it's now a Malaysian export, even though it's coming from a U.S. company. The most recent tranche of export controls designed by the Biden administration expands the usage of the foreign direct product rule, which is a little bit esoteric category of export control law, but it should put a real stop to all of that category of stuff. Now, wherever it's made in the world, if it includes U.S. content, export controls are going to apply, or Dutch or Japanese local export controls are going to apply.
You're so good at this that when you consider some of the impacts, more broadly speaking here, you're actually trying to find the impact this has economically, financially. How about for the companies themselves? Whether you're in NVIDIA or in Applied Materials, every time there's a quarterly conference call, we hear that demand is off the scale and we can't keep up with the backlog. So what does it matter to them if China's not buying?
So it's worth saying here, that it's a little bit different for different markets. Now, in the case of semiconductor manufacturing equipment, it's often described in the press as a ban, but what it really is a ban on advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment. You can still sell the old stuff.
Got it.
And it's also a ban of selling all types of equipment to those chip fabs in China that are producing advanced chips, the types of chips that would compete with an NVIDIA, for example. So what we've seen is not a reduction in demand from China. In fact, demand from China is exploding right now. But what you have seen is a major change in the composition of demand, buying more of the older types of machines that they're still allowed
that's all
to
they
buy.
can get.
Exactly.
So does that help the Intels or the AMDs or those who are not quite at the point of an NVIDIA with prohibitively advanced technology?
Yes, indeed. So what it really does is it changes what China is setting its sights on in terms of chip manufacturing. If you think about a most advanced NVIDIA chip, that's being manufactured at 5 nanometers, soon at 3 nanometers, those really, really small, really precise components at the bleeding edge. Now, what China can't buy is the equipment you use to manufacture 5 nanometers or 3 nanometers. So what you've seen is a surge of increasing chip production capacity at what we call legacy nodes, 90 nanometers, 48 nanometers, 24 nanometers. or 28 nanometers. These are the types of chips that go into your washing machine, into your hair dryer, to a certain extent into your car. And China is looking to become the new juggernaut of legacy chips. Now, for the U.S. equipment suppliers, it's been a bonanza because they're continuing to get all the dollars, but what they're selling is the older equipment. That's at least what we've seen so far. But the export controls that came out this Monday really are designed to sort of change the story.
Those old-fashioned chips go into weapons too, don't they?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Which has been quite a bit of demand for Russia. Gregory Allen, it's a great conversation and great to see you again. I appreciate the work so much. Director of the Wadhwani AI Center at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. You're always welcome here. I appreciate your research and sharing your work with us, Gregory. It's good to see you. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we turn to another bit of technology here. And the news is not great today, coming from NASA, now delaying its moon landing, its first moon landing in 2027 due to critical safety issues with the hardware. Yes, it comes down to the technology, knowing that the Artemis 2 mission set to send a crew flying by the moon, not necessarily to land on the moon, has now been delayed by 7 months to April of 2026. We heard from the now outgoing NASA administrator a short time ago, and we're joined by Bruce Einhorn now, Bloomberg News reporter on space and NASA. Bruce, it's good to have you back. Good to see you here. Is NASA ever going back to the moon without the help of Elon Musk?
According to NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, yes, it's just, it's going to take a little bit longer. So as you already mentioned, we're now looking at U.S. astronauts returning to the moon, landing on the moon now in mid-2027 instead of 2026. And similarly, the mission that precedes that, which is a flyby mission, that is now pushed back till 2026 instead of next year.
Boy, well, this is a Boeing project, correct? Boeing stranded a couple of astronauts in space, and they haven't gotten home yet. How does Boeing right the ship on its space program?
Well, just to be clear, that the issue here is not necessarily with Boeing. The concern at the moment has to do largely with the heat shield, which is something that is made by Lockheed Martin. So that's the big concern at the moment, and that's the reason that NASA Administrator Bill Nelson gave in explaining the delay, that they want to make sure that they get everything right with the heat shield. One thing that we should also point out is that Bill Nelson did say that even with the delay, this will still put the U.S. Sending people back to the moon before China gets there. China has said that they want to be there by 2030. Nelson said we're still going to get there before then.
This is just a day after, by the way, President-elect Trump named the next NASA administrator, as we told you around this time yesterday, Jared Isaacman, a former astronaut, be the first former astronaut to run the agency. What would the next phase of NASA look like, and are all the plans we just heard about today going to be at the mercy of the next administrator?
Well, it is a good point that, things potentially could be in flux. Of course, Elon Musk is very close to President-elect Trump. Elon Musk has talked extensively about his goal of sending people to Mars. President-elect Trump has also said in the past that he's very interested in Mars. So there is a question about just how much the U.S. pushes ahead with its moon plans. Making a big pivot would be a huge change and would involve quite a lot in order to make that happen. So I don't think it's way too early to say that Artemis isn't happening. But you're right that with new administration coming in, there are a lot of question marks about what comes next.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that movie before. Shares of Lockheed, by the way, down fractionally, just over $1, about a quarter of 1%. How much of a share of Lockheed's business is involved in the Artemis program?
Lockheed is making the heat shield. They also are involved in the International Space Station. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. That's not Lockheed Martin. That's Northrop Grumman. The key thing with them is the heat shield for this mission.
And as far as Boeing is concerned in its involvement here in the Artemis program, When are these astronauts coming home? Is it still February? SpaceX apparently will give them a trip back.
That is the plan, yes. So the two astronauts who went up there on the Boeing spacecraft earlier this year, they are scheduled to return on a SpaceX spacecraft in February. So it will take what was originally planned to be a mission for about a week to well over half a year.
All right, Bruce, it's great to have you in the clutch. I know you're very busy with this breaking story. Bloomberg News reporter covering the NASA announcement today, delaying its first moon landing in 2027 due to a critical safety issue with the hardware, a couple of them, but namely the heat shield, courtesy of Lockheed Martin, as Bruce just illustrated. We'll keep tabs on this for you throughout the day, and I'll meet you back at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on the late edition of Balance of Power. Join us for conversations, including Congressman French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas, who could be the next chair of the Financial Services Committee, will be with us right here in Washington. See you back then at 5. I'm Joe Matthew on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week, and a very good afternoon, everybody, live on TV, radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Tim Stenevec. Carol Masser is off today. We got Jess Menton in the house in the Bloomberg Business Week studio on this Thursday afternoon. Jess, Bloomberg Deputy Team Leader and Senior Reporter for U.S. Equities. How are you, Jess?
Doing fabulous. Can't wait to actually have a vacation coming up next week we can talk more about later on.
Okay. That's a deep tease. The thing about Jess Menton and vacations that everyone needs to know is that she doesn't plan them.
Kind of just
until the night before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of fly by the seat of my pants. Sometimes I do it the day of too, Tim.
More prep for the show, I can tell you that. She does more prep for the show than for
Definitely.
vacations. All right, we are going to get to that a little bit later in the program. But we got a busy day. Stocks struggling to gain traction. Look, we're pretty much near all-time highs as we speak. We got the 56 record this year on the S&P 500 yesterday. Bitcoin, though, hitting a new record after hitting that $100,000 mark yesterday. Got a great roundtable on that coming up. Traders, too, gearing up for that key jobs data that will help determine whether the Fed will cut or hold rates come December, Jess.
That's right. And on that, Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith is going to be standing by with us shortly for the latest on the economic data and, of course, the Fed speak, and a look ahead to, of course, Tim, tomorrow's non-farm payrolls report for November.
Also, we expect to hear from French President Emmanuel Macron, who's set to deliver an address as we speak to the French people. We're going to go to Stephen Carroll in our Paris bureau for the latest on that government collapse.
Of course, Bitcoin, 100,000, up more than 50% since Trump's election. So we've got a great roundtable, including also Zeke Fox on what we need to know coming up.
Stacey Marie Ishmael joining us, too. And Elon goes to D.C. He's working Congress as he eyes that $2 trillion cut to federal spending. We had a great team down in Washington. We're going to be checking in with them throughout the program as well. All that and more coming up over the next hour on Bloomberg Business Week. But as I mentioned, we're starting with that latest economic data. Applications for U.S. unemployment benefits rose to the highest in a month during a week that included that Thanksgiving holiday. Initial claims increasing by 9,000 to 224,000 in the week that ended November 30th. The median forecast in that Bloomberg survey of economists called for 215,000 applications. We got with us Molly Smith. She's Bloomberg News economics editor. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Molly, weekend data around this during like a holiday week tends to be kind of choppy.
Very choppy.
Very
so
choppy.
The rest of the year.
Do you care?
I mean, I can't say I don't care. That would be a bad look.
Okay.
But I mean, so yes, I do care, but it's a little hard to put a lot, more than really. You got to have a very heavy grain of salt with this, especially because the Labor Department publishes this data. What we look at it on the seasonally adjusted basis. So that's to account for some of these patterns that may happen around holidays and other factors throughout the year. But then you look at the non-seasonally adjusted. So there's this whole process. We don't need to get into the details of it, but what a seasonal adjustment factor might expect to happen at this time of year. And when you look at the unadjusted numbers, they actually fell by 35,000 in the week.
Okay.
Compared to the adjusted numbers, rose by 9,000. I know, I'm just as confused. It's hard to really know what to make of a lot of this during a holiday week. So all of that to say, this is why we look at trends over a longer period of time and not just 1 week worth of data. The 4-week moving average on initial claims, seasonally adjusted, still pretty low, not sounding any alarm bells there.
Hey, I do want to cut in with some breaking news here. Magnitude 7.0 earthquake has been recorded 99 kilometers west-southwest of Ferndale, California. That's in Northern California. That's according to the U.S. Geological Survey. The PTWC saying that hazardous tsunami waves are possible after that California quake. That's all the headlines that we have on that right now. But we'll continue to bring you any updates as we do get them from the USGS.
And ahead, looking to tomorrow, of course, we have the monthly payrolls report in October. Obviously, we saw, because of what was going on with Boeing and the strikes, the hurricanes, obviously job growth wasn't as strong as expected for that month, but a lot of analysts were already anticipating that. So what are we looking forward to for November, especially ahead of that December 18th Fed decision?
Yeah, it's definitely would look for a pretty big rebound in payrolls. I think the median estimate right now in the Bloomberg survey is around 215,000. So that compares to just 12,000 in October. So again, another number that hard to really put much weight on that October reading. So going to see a big pickup in payrolls. But I think, again, not to look at just 1 month here, and like what more economists are really looking at is the 3-month moving average in payrolls. So that would put us around a 170,000 pace if with that forecast, if that came to fruition. And of course, assuming no massive revisions to the past data, which you can never count out these days. So a lot of moving parts to consider. It's also a bit of a, right now with the unemployment rate, looks like the median forecast is for it to hold at 4.1%, but really could be just, a couple of little basis points that might tick it up to 4.2.
Why would there be such a discrepancy between what we saw in October and what we saw in November? Is it all because of natural disasters and strikes?
I mean, that's a huge part of it for sure. I think we're definitely going to be attuned to what happens with manufacturing payrolls, which were, the biggest weak spot really in the October report. And the thing as well that the BLS had called out about the October report, which was really challenging, was that the storms cut into how long they could collect data for. So that, it's usually a 10 to 16 day period. They were only able to collect data over 10 days. And you saw the response rate was below 50%, which is extraordinarily low for the first data received.
What do the survey takers want to see? And what do economists want to see?
Well, what we want to see ideally is certainly much higher than that. And what they do is, since this data is then collected over 3 months, the first reading is usually the lowest response rate. That would be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50 to 60%. By the second month's reading, you would then get it up into maybe the 80% area, and the third month would then be in the mid-90s area. So it just takes a while, but that's also why you then see the jobs data can be revised, for 2 or 3 months after the fact.
Of course, the Fed officials are about to go into a blackout period this weekend ahead of that decision later this month. We already heard, as you know, from Fed Chair Powell yesterday, who pretty much, I feel like, made it clear that you should potentially expect maybe a pause at this meeting. How do you view this whenever you're speaking with your sources?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really close right now. I mean, obviously, markets pricing in a pretty, I wouldn't say a near certainty, but certainly the vast majority are betting on a December. Wow, end of the year.
Yeah,
December cut.
Hope you've done your holiday
We're almost
shopping.
done. Sorry, rolled it back a second. We're December cut. But when you listen to what Fed speakers have to say, it's certainly a lot more measured than that. And I mean, it's not like so many of them, like obviously Waller came out and said that he's leaning toward a December cut.
And he's more on the hawkish end with Mickey Bowman.
He is, yes. I mean, obviously Mickey is really clearly the most hawkish, I think, of the committee right now. But the other ones I think are really like kind of keeping their options open. I think, they're still very cognizant of the data, of course, tomorrow and what's coming out next week when they will be in blackout, of course. So who knows? We'll just have to see.
Okay, you mentioned the Fed, so we got to go there and talk about all the Fed speakers who we've heard from just this week alone. John Williams, Mary Daly, Alberto Musalem, Jay Powell yesterday, Mary Daly also yesterday. That's just a handful of the folks we've heard from.
And we'll still have more tomorrow.
Exactly.
There's so many.
Are you getting a singular message here, or are you getting many different messages, or are you getting many people saying the same thing?
I think really it seems to be keeping the options open. Like besides, again, Waller saying that like he's leaning toward cutting in December, absent any really shocking data, there hasn't been that many really committal voices. Like that said, it does seem like, again, the Fed is not here to try to surprise people. Like that's the last thing they want to do. It's very much in their mission to be as transparent as they can, and they know what the markets are expecting. They know what is being priced in. If they see that like that's tipping so much in the balance and they're really going to go the other way, they will then somehow try to communicate that something else is coming.
What could the shocking data have? Like, what could we see in the next couple of weeks? Apart from maybe a huge miss with tomorrow's November payrolls numbers.
Well,
but
a
like,
huge miss would support a cut,
right,
for sure. I don't think, there's certainly not a conversation right now of a 25 versus 50 cut. It's either 25 or nothing. Is the conversation right now. So it's more if you get maybe a really strong payrolls report, then we have CPI next week. If we get another strong inflation reading, that certainly ups the argument for a pause.
And the options market isn't implying that big of a move for the S&P 500 when CPI comes out next week. So it's only implied about 0.6%, and the average has been about 0.9% over the last 12 months. So at least the options traders aren't seeing it to be that big of a surprise for CPI.
What do you think, Molly?
Well, I was just going to ask Jess, what do you make of the auction stuff? Admittedly, that's not really in my wheelhouse.
Well, that's usually just betting on the implied swings, which is different than what you see with the realized type moves. But especially the last few months with the macro type data, it's shifted because actually Stu Kaiser at Citi earlier this year, I asked him, when is it going to shift from inflation to more of the jobs related data? And he said, once we see the employment reports drop below 150,000, and then that's when we started to begin to see that big shift, say in the data for July and August as well for those employment data.
Right, but then September was a blowout, and that was
exactly.
a little out of consensus.
Exactly, yeah. So now you see, obviously, the conundrum there.
All right, our thanks to Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith joining us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. From the U.S. to Paris we go, where French President Emmanuel Macron is delivering an address to the French people. This coming just one day after the French government fell following that no-confidence vote in Parliament over its budget plan. Stephen Carroll is Bloomberg Radio Daybreak Europe anchor. He joins us once again from our Paris bureau. Stephen, I know you've been monitoring this address in real time. What are we learning about the French president?
The big headline is Emmanuel Macron says he will not resign before the end of his term in 2027. So that's going against the calls of some politicians and the polls. Two new ones out today showing in one case 61% of people want Emmanuel Macron to resign, the other in around the mid-50s. So he's not responding to those calls shown in those polls or from those politicians, particularly on the left wing, who've called for his resignation. Instead, he's saying that he wants to create a government that represents the political forces that exist in Parliament, a group of people who can work together to tackle, and he's been listing off some of the challenges facing France, things like the economic situation, the competitiveness issue in Europe, the climate, and indeed conflicts he's mentioned as well, that will need more support and a functional French government to be able to tackle them. He said he'll be naming his prime minister in the coming days, so not tonight being the short answer. We had been wondering whether or not he might surprise us with a name. There's been a series of meetings happening all day at the Elysee Palace with various political leaders, which has led to lots of speculation about who could be in the running for this job. But for the moment, Emmanuel Macron holding course. He's still speaking as I'm speaking to you, Tim, but he seems to be sticking to his plan, sticking to his mandate, and he's even mentioned the weekend reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral as an event that he is looking forward to.
As you know, Stephen, Michel Barnier lost that no-confidence vote, and for the first time in more than 60 years, the French government has been brought down by a no-confidence vote by the MPs here, and that would potentially make him the shortest-serving prime minister in modern history of France since he just came in September. So when you're speaking about these potential people who could come in and take that position, what kind of names are popping up right now?
Okay, so you have to, there are lots of names being put out there. Some people are nominating themselves, like the former socialist presidential candidate Ségolène Royal, who said that she was available if Emmanuel Macron wanted to pick her as prime minister. I think that's pretty unlikely, but good for her to put herself forward. The key thing that Emmanuel Macron needs in this is somebody who can try and create a majority or at least a working minority in Parliament. The maths are pretty complicated because the National Assembly is so fractured from the big groupings on the far left and the far right, and he's currently working, or at least the last coalition that was built was with a centre-right party, wasn't big enough to be able to pass a budget, as we saw. So really we're focusing on the centre-left party, the Socialist Party, to see if somebody could emerge perhaps from that fold that might be able to unite people around them. So the names being spoken about are the former Socialist Prime Minister, Bernard Cazeneuve, other centrist politicians, Sébastien Lecornu, who's currently the Defence Minister. We're also thinking about François Bayrou, who's a long-standing centrist politician in France. A couple of names being mentioned too from the centre-right as well. The former Minister François Barouin, who was from the centre-right party, also being mentioned too. But it's really difficult to see how any of these names, with perhaps the exceptions of those on the left, would change the calculations or would change the situation that Michel Barnier had. He was somebody from the centre-right political tradition. He had this long experience as a storied negotiator, and yet he wasn't able to do it. So it's a big challenge to figure out who actually might be able to do it if they're handed this job.
Yeah, it kind of also raises the question, like, who would want a challenge such as this, given the track record, at least in recent months, Stephen. France will now have a caretaker government. What does that mean?
So for now, it essentially means that everyone remains in their job. The kind of legal procedure that follows the vote of no confidence is that Michel Barnier had to go to the Elysee Palace to meet Emmanuel Macron earlier this morning to tender his resignation and the resignation of the government. In return, Emmanuel Macron says that he had taken notice of that resignation, but he asked Michel Barnier and his colleagues to stay on and keep things ticking over, essentially until a new prime minister is appointed. Now, Emmanuel Macron, it should be said, did say that he would appoint a prime minister in the coming days. So it won't be like the last time around where it took months between July and September for him to find a candidate for prime minister. We are expecting him to move a little bit faster than that. In terms of the finances, which is the key part here, because the reason that the government fell was over the budget. The budget currently runs till the end of this year. That's not that far away, as we know. So Emmanuel Macron did say in his address that they would be passing the special law to allow for, I suppose, the kind of temporary, sort of continuing resolution to happen with the French budget, where essentially what they do is they take the 2024 budget, divide it in 12, and they give it out month by month. So that means that you can continue to raise taxes, pay benefits, run state services, but not really make any new decisions about that. And economists have been warning that even in that situation, France's budget deficit, which was already quite large, could get even bigger. And that's, of course, what we'd be worried about if we're watching it from a market's point of view.
And France has been plagued by political uncertainty after the summer election resulted in a hung parliament, a result that really can't be changed until elections next July. So how exactly does this play out, and what scenarios could we see? Because we are seeing stock markets in France looking pretty jittery right now.
Yeah, that's right. And look, it's interesting because so Emmanuel Macron can't call elections until next July. He doesn't have to. And he has, in the phrasing of his address, and I was watching it to see, he did talk about wanting a government that would be able to continue to work, that would be useful, in his words, and didn't allude to the fact that he was planning to call elections in next July when he will be legally able to. So there's a question mark over whether or not there will be elections. It really depends on how, I suppose, the next Prime Minister fares, whether they manage to basically draw enough support into a sort of government of national unity, perhaps a technocratic government that Emmanuel Macron says will represent political forces in the parliament. But there has been some talk today from some of the politicians from the centrist parties of perhaps getting together the group known as the Republican Front, which used to, in French elections, unite to block the far right from getting elected. So that gives you an idea of where there could be negotiating room. We know that there's the strongest opposition on both sides of the political spectrum. The middle is pretty narrow. Even if he did manage to win over, for example, the Socialist Party into the current coalition, he'd still be a little bit short of a majority. He'd probably need the Greens as well. Okay. But again, it's very difficult to see without being able to convince those parties to come on board and essentially go into business with their traditional political rivals and then take what the electorate will think of that down the line when there will be a vote.
Stephen, we only have like 30 seconds left, but you spent 10 years in Paris earlier in your career. You've spent a little more time there in recent days. How is this dominating the conversation just in regular life right now?
I mean, look, people are sort of bemused, frustrated. The elections in July really came as a big shock to everyone. That hasn't gone away. Nobody really feels like anything's been done since the last elections, and that sense of frustration is playing out on all sorts of measures, and that's going to get even worse for some people because income taxes with this rollover of the budget will go up for nearly 18 million households in January. Now, pensioners will get more money, but there'll be other people who'll be worrying about their tax bills too.
All right, Stephen Carroll, Bloomberg Radio Daybreak Europe anchor, joining us once again from our Paris bureau. Just an update on that earthquake you mentioned a little earlier in the hour, a magnitude 7.0 earthquake off the coast of Northern California. It's triggered a tsunami warning across a swath of the U.S. West Coast. That quake detected 62 miles west-southwest of Ferndale. There's a tsunami warning now in effect for Eureka. That's more than 250 miles north of San Francisco. We'll continue to bring you updates on that as we get news. This is Business Week.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is a Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenevec. That's Jess Menton in for Carol Masser today. Taking a look at the S&P 500, kind of doing a whole lot of nothing right now. This after its 56th new record high of the year yesterday, just down, not even 0.1%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 0.3%, while the Nasdaq right now is higher by just about 0.1%. Hey, I do want to bring everyone an update on that strong Northern California earthquake that has triggered a tsunami warning. Our team here at Bloomberg News reporting that a magnitude 7.0 earthquake off the coast of Northern California has triggered a tsunami warning across a swath of the U.S. West Coast. That quake, Jess, was detected 62 miles. It's about 100 kilometers west-southwest of the city of Ferndale at 10:44 a.m. local time. That's according to the USGS. A tsunami warning now in effect for Eureka. That's more than 250 miles north of San Francisco.
That's right, Tim. And office workers in areas including San Francisco, as well as the waterfront there in the district, were evacuating from their buildings to higher ground. And of course, the 7.0 is larger than the one that shook San Francisco on October 17th, 1989. That's when a magnitude 6.9 earthquake knocked out power and killed 63 people throughout the region, Tim.
We'll continue to bring you updates on this. We don't know much about it at this point. That tsunami warning, though, now in effect from the central Oregon coast to just north of Santa Cruz, California, in Northern California. The earthquake earlier today occurred along an active plate boundary off of the California coast. Jessica Turner, who's a geophysicist with the USGS National Earthquake Information Center, said there were 4 other small earthquakes along that boundary in recent days that were likely too small to be felt by people on shore. Once again, that magnitude 7.0 earthquake off the coast of Northern California has triggered tsunami warnings across a swath of the U.S. West Coast. We'll continue to bring you updates as we do get them. Well, speaking of updates, the price of Bitcoin. We're always watching that. President-elect Donald Trump's pick of a crypto proponent to be the next head of the SEC lifted Bitcoin to $100,000 for the first time as traders warmed to the prospect of relaxed regulations. We got with us Stacey Marie Ishmael, managing editor for crypto at Bloomberg News. Stacey Marie joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Zeke Fox is a Bloomberg News financial investigations reporter. He's also the author of Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. Zeke joins us from New York as well. Stacey Marie, there are those moments when it comes to news events that are kind of indelible in people's minds. You know, you talk to people when they heard about the assassination of JFK, or more recently in our lifetimes, COVID. You know, where were you when you heard Tom Hanks had COVID and the NBA was shutting down the season?
Austin, Texas.
Exactly, is Bitcoin, were you there for South by Southwest?
No, I was there for work.
Okay, you were there for work, okay. Is this one of those moments where it's that significant when it comes to the history of cryptocurrency? Where were you when Bitcoin hit 100K?
I will say that was very much the vibe of folks in and around Bitcoin and crypto yesterday, particularly on social media, whether it was LinkedIn or X or Blue Sky. Folks who are CEOs, folks who are developers, folks who are just retail traders were like, it's here, we've made it, our time is now.
Zeke, I wanted to bring you into the conversation because something I've been asking a lot of people about is sort of the frothiness, because once you get to 100,000, a lot of people want to start talking about technicals, about resistance, but I mean, where do you find resistance from there? And what I'm wondering too is when you have people like the Hawk-Tua girl, Haley Welch, that are kind of jumping in and trying to launch these type of meme coins, are we actually at the phase here where things are looking a little too frothy for the crypto space?
Well, what the Bitcoin proponents would say is that all the attention that Bitcoin is getting around the price hitting this milestone, like the coverage, us talking about it right now, is part of the momentum that's going to drive it even higher. And this crypto executive, Dan Held, I once heard him explain it in a pretty interesting way. He called it number go up technology. And he said, it's a very powerful piece of technology. It's the price. As the price goes higher, more people become aware of it and buy it in anticipation of the price continuing to climb. Now, I don't think that that is a sustainable state of affairs, but that's what's been driving Bitcoin higher now. It's up 5-fold since its lows after FTX collapsed back in November 2022. It's pretty wild to see how far it's come.
It is wild. Stacey Marie, I want to bring you back in here. The reason I asked about where you were, because my phone blew up, as I think everybody else's did, with notifications about this. I was talking to somebody who works in real estate development, who has an MBA, who understands cash flows, and is extremely skeptical about why Bitcoin is worth $100,000. There are still many of those skeptics out there.
I think there are more people who don't know and don't care than there are skeptics, and then there are the true believers. That's sort of the segmentation. What I would say is, in addition to the very common market dynamic that Zeke just described about people being attracted to large numbers, and especially numbers that seem to be on a positive trajectory, there is the reality that there is something of an institutional price floor in the market now for Bitcoin, and that is the participation of the enormous asset managers, the BlackRocks of the world, who are getting more involved in things like ETFs, the people who want to put Bitcoin into people's 401ks and have that kind of institutionalization of how retail investors are getting access to this asset. And that is driving some amounts of the enthusiasm. But the other is the possibility that the US federal government might itself become a large holder of Bitcoin.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. Why you're talking about a potential strategic Bitcoin reserve, or maybe other methods of the US buying this during the next administration. What's the justification for that? Like, how do you get that past taxpayers?
How you get it past taxpayers is a question for political scientists, but the justification that's being offered by the administration is that Bitcoin, the US should be the world capital of financial innovation, and Bitcoin and blockchain technology are key elements of that, right? That's the claim. And Zeke was there in Nashville when President-elect Trump was kind of making these claims to a large gathering of people who are absolutely primed to believe it. The problem for, I think, the average taxpayer, to your point, is joining the dots between this is a virtual currency, a digital currency. It's not something that you can hold. It's not like a vaccine or wheat or petroleum that in a time of crisis you have exactly a clear sense of how this will be used. But for folks who believe in Bitcoin and folks who believe in blockchain, they're like, just getting that assurance from the US government is enough.
Zeke, I want to bring you back into this conversation so you can talk more about when you have a new administration coming in here, and then sort of the lack of regulation when it comes to the crypto space. How do you view, and your sources view, kind of the direction of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies with the Trump administration coming in again?
Well, it's kind of funny that Bitcoiners are so concerned with regulation. I mean, in most ways, Bitcoin was already legal and wasn't facing huge threats from whatever administration was going to come. I think that Bitcoiners are really excited to have the president talking about Bitcoin and talking about the possibility of this strategic reserve, even if it is kind of far-fetched. Trump truthed today on Truth Social. Congratulations, Bitcoiners. You're welcome. And what he's saying is that, I mean, he flew to Nashville. He gave a speech at the Bitcoin conference where he laid out how he was going to do things to help promote Bitcoin. He said that, the US, if Bitcoin's going to the moon, the US is going to lead the way. And now, without even doing anything, just with his election and with what he's been saying, he's gotten kind of the Bitcoin mania going to like new heights. And it should be said that Bitcoin executives came together to give Trump $25 million in campaign donations, which helped smooth the way for him to flip from calling Bitcoin a scam, which is what he said during his first administration.
So, Stacey Marie, how do you view sort of the flip-flopping there? Because when you think of even, say, an Elon Musk with EV makers and things like that, they definitely benefited, and his company benefited more so under a Biden administration. But we were thinking about the crypto side of things and maybe the AI side of things. How is this sort of shift coming in your kind of view?
I mean, I think one of the big things, Zeke is entirely correct. Bitcoin itself wasn't targeted by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission in any real way, but pretty much every other part of the market was, right? If you were somebody who was doing transactions in Ether on the Ethereum blockchain, if you were somebody who was doing crypto lending, if you were somebody who was lending to somebody who was doing crypto lending, the SEC probably found a way to sue you, or at least to tell you to stop doing that thing. And the widespread expectation, especially among the folks who were celebrating on social media yesterday, is that it'll be a totally different ballgame under the new regulatory regime.
Okay, so that's exactly where I want to go right now. And I brought this up in a live Q&A that we did on the Bloomberg terminal and for Bloomberg subscribers a little earlier today about Bitcoin hitting 100,000. Zeke, I want to send this on over to you first and then have Stacey Marie weigh in. And it's just the whole idea behind regulations. We live in a world with regulations and with laws, and those laws and regulations, a lot of people would argue, are there for a reason. I'm wondering to what extent you think the guardrails will be off an industry like cryptocurrency during the Trump administration, and if at all we could see negative repercussions for that. I mean, we're just 2 years out from the collapse of FTX, and a lot of folks who lost quite a lot of money, some of it has been recovered at this point with different projects, but there were folks who were hurting for quite a bit of time in the wake of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just watching an old interview with Paul Atkins, who's tapped to be the next SEC commissioner, and he was saying that he felt some of the huge frauds that occurred during the last crypto boom, like FTX, were the result of the SEC not creating a set of crypto-specific regulations that would bring the industry inside them. And instead, since it was difficult to comply, people were just sort of running wild. I'm not sure how true that is. And we mentioned Paktua coin today. Yeah, this is they've actually been a huge number of these meme coins where basically somebody with some degree of notoriety starts promoting some made-up coin. People jump in hoping that the price will pump and that they'll get out while the getting is good. And then inevitably it's like a zero-sum game, or actually worse, most of the people who do it are going to lose money. Now, where that fits in like a pro-crypto regulatory regime, I'm not sure, but it doesn't seem like the kind of economic activity we should be encouraging.
Stacey Marie, I want to give you the last word here, 30 seconds on this. Thinking about a regulatory environment where guardrails could be off.
I think one of the most important things to that point you're making, Zeke, and what you said in the conversation earlier, is what does this mean for a person who buys something that they think is real from somebody they think is reliable that turns out to be a scam, a fraud, misrepresented, missold? What is the recourse that they have? And a lot of the industry's focus has been on the regulation of the companies, the exchanges, the technology itself. And there's a large gap, particularly in the US, for consumer protections as it relates to that. And I am personally very interested in seeing whether we'll get any movement there.
We'll definitely appreciate you both of us joining us. Stacey Marie Ishmael, managing editor for crypto at Bloomberg News. Also Zeke Fox, Bloomberg News financial investigations reporter, also the author of Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. We continue to monitor the situation in Northern California, where a magnitude 7.0 earthquake off the coast has triggered a tsunami warning across a swath of the U.S. West Coast. That quake detected 62 miles west-southwest of the city of Ferndale. That at 10:44 a.m. local time, according to the USGS. A tsunami warning now in effect for Eureka, more than 250 miles north of San Francisco, as well as from the central Oregon coast, Jess, to just north of Santa Cruz, California.
That's right, and Thursday's earthquake occurred along an active plate boundary off the California coast here. And Jessica Turner, a geophysicist with the USGS National Earthquake Information Center, said 4 other small earthquakes along that boundary in recent days were too small to be felt.
We'll continue to bring you updates as the story develops. You're listening to and watching Bloomberg Business Week.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenevec. That is Jess Metton. We're live here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio in New York. The S&P 500 pretty much flat right now, but in the red. The NASDAQ completely flat as we speak. The Dow down about 0.4%. Stocks just really struggling to gain traction near those all-time highs.
And apparently potentially snapping 4 consecutive sessions of gains here, but as you pointed out earlier, Tim, 56 records in 2024 for the S&P 500 through yesterday. Looking at today, though, you have consumer discretionary up more than 1%, but then you have materials down more than 1%. Of course, we were just talking about Bitcoin eclipsing 100,000. I want to point out, though, when you're looking at the options market, what it's suggesting about how traders are hedging some of that activity after sort of the record run that we've seen. So David Pan has a great story in the terminal here, how it looks like some of the traders in the options market have already started to hedge, get a potential pullback after obviously we've seen such a big run you were pointing out earlier in Bitcoin too. So now they have potentially, if you're looking at the cryptocurrency surging more than 100,000 for the first time, but you're seeing more of an uptick for demand for puts. So basically that's telling you if you're hedging for demand for puts there, that's more of obviously hedging there than you would be for saying call options.
Hey, I do want to bring everybody an update on that strong Northern California earthquake that we have been covering. Just in the last few minutes, we learned that there is no longer a tsunami threat from that magnitude 7.0 earthquake that occurred near the coast of Northern California on Thursday. It did trigger tsunami warnings across a swath of the U.S. West Coast, but that passed less than an hour later. This quake was detected about 99 kilometers west-southwest of the city of Ferndale at 10:44 a.m. local time. That's according to the U.S. Geological Survey. A tsunami warning was briefly in effect for Eureka. That's more than 250 miles north of San Francisco, as well as from the central Oregon coast to just north of Santa Cruz, California. A 7.0 earthquake, Jess, it's larger than the one that shook San Francisco on October 17th, 1989. That was when a magnitude 6.9 earthquake knocked out power. It also killed 63 people throughout the region. That's the Loma Prieta earthquake. It collapsed an elevated freeway and part of the Bay Bridge, which links San Francisco to Oakland. That disaster also disrupted that World Series baseball game between the San Francisco Giants and, at the time, the Oakland A's.
That's right. So looking at what this could potentially mean here, but the tsunami threat from California earthquake, as Tim was just mentioning earlier, has now passed.
All right, we'll continue to bring you any updates as they continue to break right here on Bloomberg Business Week. In the meantime, we got all eyes on what's going on when it comes to tariffs and the potential threat of tariffs from the incoming administration. Our Bloomberg intelligence team actually out with a new note this morning about the risks of tariffs, specifically on U.S. automakers. U.S. automakers could see more than $3,500 in added labor costs per vehicle if President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs are imposed on imports from Canada and Mexico. And the figure may also rise if auto parts are reshored. This is according to a Bloomberg intelligence analysis. Ford, GM, and Stellantis might bear the biggest brunt given their production in Mexico, but Tesla could be least affected. We got with us Lindley Brown, partner in global trade at Ernst & Young. She joins us from San Francisco this afternoon. Lindley, first of all, how are you out in California right now?
Good. It's hard to complain.
Great.
December in California.
Okay, good. Just wanted to check there. Hey, I do want to get an idea from you, first of all, how you think about the relationship between tax and tariffs, because this is the intersection of your specialty at EY, and specifically the conversations that you're having right now with leaders at companies all around the country as they prepare for the incoming administration.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been very busy, and this is certainly the topic du jour. With the current threat of widespread tariffs, companies are really examining multiple avenues of mitigation, and one of those levers, one of those super powerful mitigating factors is customs valuation. Pertinent to customs valuation is tax, particularly where you have buyers and sellers in these global transactions who are related. Namely, the automakers, the companies that you named in kind of the intro, this is them, right? This is that valuation of products. That is all tax.
And Tim was actually just mentioning a really interesting stat from Bloomberg Intelligence where they were compiling data about how Detroit automakers face a $3,500 a car hike on Trump tariffs, potentially an added labor cost per vehicle. What I'm wondering, when you have a situation like this, What are the potential here of this getting passed down to consumers and shoppers of these types of vehicles?
Yeah, that's a great question. The importer of record will bear that duty cost 100% of the time, right? Then to your point, right, the question is, will that product, from a price elasticity perspective, will they be able to pass that on to consumers or not, right? If you are the only seller of a very particular product, you can charge whatever you want to. If you're not, and there's, a lot of competition, those companies are probably going to absorb those costs. And that's when comes in these mitigating activities, right? How do you mitigate the extent of those tariffs so that it doesn't, because those go right into cost of goods sold, but the ability to pass those costs on to consumers will totally depend on the availability of, and the competitiveness in this market.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean geographic competitiveness and companies
exactly.
that might not necessarily be imported? Like how does that work? Because you would imagine that every company is sort of dealing with the same thing, at least if they're manufacturing products in those areas.
Yeah, so we've certainly seen a shift, right? So from 2018 with the first Trump administration until now, companies have certainly diversified their supply chain. They moved out of China. They moved to, nearshoring, right? They moved to Mexico. Certain other companies, moved other places from a supply and demand perspective. The impact of the tariffs is on those automakers that sort of went all in from a Mexico perspective. They're in that bullseye right now. It's totally geographical. It depends on, nearshoring, farshoring, whatever decisions you made to diversify your manufacturing base. That will certainly impact what options you have available to mitigate the tariffs and just how impacted you are.
So walk us through how exactly tax and customs departments will end up having to work together on this.
Yeah, it is really, it's interesting because, within EY, I sit in the tax group, right? I'm in indirect tax. That's kind of an EY construct. Within most companies, and certainly it will vary based on sector and based on product, customs could sit in supply chain. It could sit in legal. It could sit in tax. Automotive, for example, historics tell us it sits in tax. Technology sits in tax. Where that doesn't happen, right? What these companies are going to need to do and have already started doing is connecting those dots to say, if I really want to decrease my duties on imported products, most duties are ad valorem. They're a percentage of customs value. To the extent you decrease your customs value, you pay less duties. The only way you're really decreasing that value is to team with tax, particularly in these areas of related party pricing. So where you are purchasing from a related party, you have a lot more ability and kind of, you have the ability to kind of change where is the profit in that value chain. That is a tax discussion with a customs valuation lens. Those rules are different. OECD transfer pricing, WTO customs valuation rules, but they have the same goal, right? Arm's length pricing. So those two groups will undoubtedly work together. They have been largely since 2018. And for any of those linkages that were broken, they will certainly pick that right back up. And that is the way that both customs and tax kind of team together to create the most strategic value to enterprises when they're in this immediate kind of blizzard of tariff discussions.
Lindley, really appreciate you joining us. Lindley Brown, partner in global trade at Ernst & Young, joining us this afternoon on the latest when it comes to how executives, how boardrooms are thinking about the added labor costs or the added costs associated with Trump's tariffs. Again, we don't know what's going to happen on January 20th. We only know what the president-elect has said thus far, Jess. I do want to bring everyone an update on that news breaking out of California that we've been following. There's no longer a tsunami threat from that magnitude 7.0 earthquake that occurred near the coast of Northern California Thursday, Jess. This according to the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, releasing a statement just in the last few minutes.
That's right, and it said that it passed in less than an hour, so the quake was detected 62 miles west-southwest of the city of Ferndale at 10:44 a.m. local time, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. And a tsunami warning was briefly in effect, like Tim was mentioning, but no longer is, for Eureka, which was more than 250 miles north of San Francisco, Tim.
We should note that shortly after the earthquake, residents in San Francisco received an emergency tsunami alert on their mobile, warning of a series of powerful waves and powerful currents impacting nearby coasts. Here's what the alert said. You're in danger, move to higher ground or inland now. We should note that that tsunami threat passed less than an hour after that warning. This is Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenevec. That is Jess Menton in for Carol Masser on this Thursday afternoon. Just a quick update on that news that we're following out of Northern California. There is no longer a tsunami threat from a magnitude 7.0 earthquake that occurred near the coast of Northern California on Thursday. This just according to the Pacific just in the last half hour.
That's right. And so we've been keeping updates on this. And so that obviously what we were looking at earlier about the tsunami warning, not as dire as what people were expecting earlier, but looking at what Jessica Turner, a geophysicist with the USGS National Earthquake Information Center, said there were 4 other small earthquakes along that boundary in recent days that were likely too small to be felt by people on shore. And also shortly after the earthquake, residents in San Francisco received an emergency tsunami alert on their mobile, warning of a series of powerful waves and powerful currents impacting those nearby coasts. But as Tim mentioning, that no longer is the case as of now.
Let's talk a little bit about what Elon Musk is doing, because he's going to Washington, D.C. He's working the halls down there in Washington to talk to lawmakers about where exactly he can cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. As part of the Department of Government Efficiency, we got with us Bloomberg News Capital Influence team leader Megan Scully joining us from Washington, D.C. Who's he talking to, Megan? What do we know?
He's been talking to key senators, such as Senator Thune, the incoming Senate Majority Leader. And then he went over to the House side and met with Speaker Johnson. And he's currently in a meeting with Vivek Ramaswamy and several other Republicans from both chambers. They've all been invited to this meeting, all Republicans, no Democrats are invited. They're currently meeting behind closed doors.
And so when it comes to a dynamic like this, because what Elon Musk is in, it's supposed to be like a non-governmental type of entity. So how exactly does this work when he's trying to work with members of Congress?
So this is an unusual setup here. They're calling it a department. It is not a department. We've had a lot of independent commissions over the years here in Washington examining federal spending and looking at ways to cut the budget or otherwise rein in expenses. So that is essentially what this is. Of course, it certainly has the star power that Musk brings with it, as well as his deep connections to the president-elect. So he has a bit more heft than, perhaps previous commissions of this sort. But it is not a department such as, a cabinet-level agency.
One question that I continue to have is where this $2 trillion comes from.